The story begins with Kurt, the protagonist, looking terrified as he hears the howl of a Fenrir, an S-ranked mythical creature that had recently destroyed a large city. The party he belonged to, the Dragon Fang of Fires, had been hired by a village that used all their money to fend off the monsters. While Kurt was planning to hide somewhere safe, the Fenrir suddenly appeared and threw him aside. Golnova, the acting leader, instructed Bandana the ranger to attack. She attempted to immobilize the creature using strings, but the Fenrir was too strong. It whipped Bandana around while still holding the strings. Bandana was severely injured, but Marlephus, the party's magic master, used her staff called Unicorn's Horn to heal her wounds. As Bandana healed, she fell, but Kurt tried to catch her. However, she quickly got back on her feet on her own. Kurt was impressed by Bandana, who was known for wielding 7 tools as weapons. The Fenrir became further entangled by more strings, and Golnova, the warrior, saw an opportunity. He used his flame sword to strike the Fenrir, gritting his teeth as he unleashed a fiery slash. With one powerful blow, Golnova burned the Fenrir to ashes. Thus, the hero party known as the Dragon Fang of Fires defeated a Fenrir, marking the beginning of their journey as world-saving heroes. Soon after, Golnova complained that the food at the village banquet tasted bad and asked Kurt to cook something for him. Kurt cleaned up Golnova's mess first. Suddenly, Bandana mentioned that Kurt had recently burned his cooking. This led to Golnova firing Kurt from the team. Kurt asked if he had done something wrong. Golnova exclaimed that Kurt couldn't even defeat a slime on his own. Marlephus then reminded Golnova of the rule stating that a party should have 4 members, and all members needed to be strong. Bandana suggested getting rid of the extra baggage that couldn't keep up. Kurt begged Golnova not to remove him from the party. However, Golnova simply responded with a punch, and that was how Kurt was kicked out of the hero's party. A typical story. Kurt blacked out and soon found himself alone. He traveled on his own with little money left. He returned to Samara City to save some money. He thought about joining another party but still hoped that Golnova would invite him back. Then he noticed an employment agency and didn't hesitate to go inside. Kurt was surprised by the cheerful employee's greeting. He explained that he was looking for work, and the girl offered to guide him through an interview and an aptitude test. He introduced himself as Kurt Locke Hans, stating that he was currently 15 years old and from Hasuto Village, a quiet village in the mountains. The employee asked what Kurt had been doing up to that point, and he shared that he had worked as a baggage carrier and was considered a burden by the Dragon Fangs of Flame. The employee was surprised to learn that Kurt had been part of an SS-ranked party. Kurt clarified that he had been fired from the group. The employee assured him that it was still an impressive background and suggested proceeding with the aptitude test. She asked if Kurt had ever taken one before, but he confirmed that he had not. The employee explained that aptitude was a talent granted by God, and one's power depended on their aptitude rank. She expressed hope that they could discover Kurt's hidden talent this time. After the aptitude test, it was revealed that Kurt had the worst aptitude in all combat-related skills. He cried, but the employees reassured him that there were still non-combat professions available. However, Kurt insisted that he needed work immediately because he had run out of money. The employee then asked him to pick up a nearby sandbag. When Kurt touched it, he felt his magic energy being absorbed. He lifted it to the level of his thighs and found it to be quite heavy. The employee thanked him and offered him some construction work repairing the city walls in Tycorn City. She suggested working for a week, and Kurt was relieved to have found a job. At Tycorn's frontier walls, a man angrily asked what Kurt needed. Nervously, Kurt handed him a letter of recommendation, and the man couldn't refuse since more workers were needed. He was told to listen carefully as the instructions would only be given once. Kurt was simply instructed to use the cement and repair the broken section of the wall. He noticed that the other workers weren't using magic with the cement and attempted to ask the team leader about it. The man responded that the explanation would only be given once, expecting results in 3 hours. It was mentioned that rewards would be based on performance, and then the man left. Kurt assumed the man viewed him as unreliable. However, Kurt knew he could finish a barrel of cement in 5 minutes, so he decided to give it his best effort. 3 hours later, the man was shocked to find that the walls had been repaired as if they were brand new. Kurt apologized for the limited work, explaining that there had been a shortage of cement. He confirmed that only 15 barrels of cement had been used. The man began sweating nervously, wondering who Kurt was to have covered a third of the wall in just 3 hours. Meanwhile, Kurt felt anxious, assuming he had messed up and might get fired again. The man then asked how Kurt had reached the higher sections without ladders. Kurt explained that he had simply thrown the cement and it stuck to the wall. Shocked, the man asked how long Kurt would be available to work. Kurt requested a week, but the man asked him to stop for the day. Kurt received his pay and was told more would be sent through the agency. With the payment in his hands, Kurt resolved to give his all the next day. However, Kurt was asked by the man not to return anymore. Kurt felt as if he had lost his purpose in life again. He asked if he could stay for at least 3 more days, but the man complained that Kurt would be taking away the available work meant for others. It was explained that the wall's repair work was intended to provide wages to the poor, and if Kurt finished everything, the others wouldn't have any income. Kurt's skills were praised, being described as even better than those of SS-ranked workers. He was told to go work for the royal sections instead. A pouch of coins was handed to Kurt, which he misunderstood as extra payment for his efforts, aside from the compliments. The man left angrily, and Kurt couldn't believe he had lost the job in just 1 day. Kurt decided to return to the agency where Kilshell, the female employee from before, assumed things hadn't gone well. She recorded Kurt's task and started looking for another short-term job. Just then, someone shouted, and Kil asked her coworker what had happened. It was explained that a customer was looking for miners, but his mine lacked a reliable record and upfront payments. Kilshell suggested that an investor should be found before hiring miners. A pretty woman exclaimed that there wasn't enough time as she needed to pay taxes that same week, and the country would take over the mine if she didn't. Kurt understood that the pretty woman had her own problems, especially with taxes. He offered his services, and the girls were left surprised. He mentioned that he had experience in mining. Kilshell grew concerned and warned him not to expect great rewards. The woman turned argumentative and complained about Kilshell's bluntness. It was suggested that someone better, like a dwarf, should be hired instead of Kurt, who appeared thin and lanky. Kilshell then informed Eushelia, the woman, that 10 coins would be needed in advance for hiring dwarves. Since she didn't have that much money, Eushelia asked Kurt directly if he really had mining experience. Hurt by her earlier comments, Kurt confirmed that he did. Eushelia sighed and chose to hire him. Kurt waved goodbye to Kilshell with a happy expression. Kilshell felt uneasy but hoped for the best as she found Kurt both cute and charismatic. Just then, a transfer letter arrived, and Kilshell read that Kurt had been paid 200 gold coins for recent repair work. She stood in silence for a while, reading the document from every angle. She couldn't believe that 200 gold coins had been paid to Kurt. Out of shock, she stumbled backward and tripped on her own foot. She noticed a sandbag nearby, but her coworker corrected her, explaining that it was actually a tool used to check a person's magic power. It was said that the tool would feel heavy to those with significant magical power, and would only respond if the lifter's magic exceeded that of a court magician. Kilshell remembered how Kurt had lifted the tool as if it were heavy. Her coworker then asked for the tool to be moved, and Kilshell easily picked it up. She began to wonder who Kurt really was. After some preparations, Kurt and Eushelia arrived in the mountains. Kurt thought Eushelia must be wealthy to own a mountain. However, Eushelia explained that the mountains had been inherited from her grandmother, and they were supposed to be full of rare stones. There had also been a plan to build a road through the area, but the idea had been abandoned. Kurt remembered that on the other side of the mountain was the Lord Tycooni's town, and he figured it must have been difficult to build a road there. After walking for a while, they reached their headquarters, but all Kurt saw was a single tent. He was told by Eushelia to bear with it. Kurt assumed they would be sharing the tent, and Eushelia had wondered if Kurt was concerned about his bad sleeping habits. It was exclaimed by Kurt that he would never dare to sleep in the same tent as someone as beautiful as Eushelia. The employer became flustered and repeatedly said she was not beautiful at all. Kurt couldn't believe how unaware she was. It was shared by Kurt that despite traveling all over the world, Eushelia was the prettiest woman he had ever seen. His neck was grabbed by Eushelia as she ordered him to stop. She stated that she had been an adventurer since the age of 10, and because of that, she couldn't possibly be considered pretty. Eushelia then tossed him a baked potato. Kurt suddenly missed the food from the previous village he and the others had saved. He didn't recall ever eating with his ex-teammates. While Eushelia talked about how the potato should be cooked properly, Kurt mentioned that it had been a long time since he had eaten food prepared by someone else. The potato might have been cold and a bit undercooked, but it was one of the tastiest things he had eaten in a while. Poor Kurt. Kurt tried to sleep while sitting, but Eurytia urged him to come inside the tent. He refused, not wanting to share the space, but Eurytia insisted, saying she didn't want him to catch a cold and get sick before they started working. With no other option, Kurt went inside. He tried to fall asleep quickly but found it difficult. When Eurytia checked on him, he pretended to be asleep. She crawled into the tent, and noticing how quiet it had become, Kurt glanced over at her, only to realize she was undressed. He froze for a moment. The image burned into his memory, almost letting out a shocked cry before forcing himself to lie down again. But his troubled thoughts wouldn't let him rest, so he eventually decided to leave the tent. He sighed, thinking Eurytia was far too careless in front of him. Unbeknownst to him, Eurytia had been pretending to sleep. She realized her mistake, feeling guilty for testing Kurt. She had needed to see if he would try anything while they were together for the week. Calling him a good boy, she thought to herself that Kurt was the more beautiful one. The next morning, Eurytia woke up and found Kurt sleeping outside. Surprised, she quickly tried to cover herself, then noticed a set of clothes nearby. They were hers, but they looked newly mended. with wooden buttons replacing the old ones. She was shocked at how fresh the clothes appeared after being sewn. Wondering who had fixed them, she noticed small wood chips beside the sleeping Kurt. Shortly after, Eurytia thanked Kurt for fixing her clothes. Kurt didn't mind, but Eurytia was bothered by how good his skills were. She thought her repaired clothes were brand new. She then explained their goal of paying off the tax bills within a week. Kurt asked where the mine was, and Eurytia replied that they would have to start digging one. Kurt was shocked and asked where she wanted to dig. Eurytia left that choice to him despite not having any survey materials. Kurt then asked if she was looking for something specific. A few minutes later, a tired Eurytia was following Kurt. They soon arrived at a spot and Kurt picked something up. Eurytia wondered if it was a special ore. Kurt said the ore itself wasn't special unless it was broken open. He casually split the ore with a garden hoe. Inside there was something shiny, and Kurt revealed it was a crystal that could pay off at least a third of Eurytia's debt. She was even more surprised by how easily Kurt cracked the ore with just a light touch. Kurt explained that it was simple, you just needed to aim at the weak point of the rock. Eurytia asked how he knew the ore had crystals inside, and Kurt said it was just based on his intuition. He then offered to teach her how to do it. Soon after, Eurytia felt dejected because she didn't understand anything Kurt had taught her. Kurt blamed himself, thinking he was a bad teacher. He then asked if they should sell the pile of crystals they had gathered. Eurytia refused to sell them right away since Kurt had done most of the work. Kurt agreed, saying the ones they found were still cheap, and he decided to turn them into magic crystals. Eurytia was stunned and asked if Kurt was talking about jewelry with magical powers. Without hesitation, Kurt applied his magical power to the crystal, finishing it in an instant. Eurytia couldn't believe it was already done. Kurt was confused, but Eurytia exclaimed that only 10 people in the world could create magic crystals. When Kurt showed her, Eurytia was shocked because something that usually took an hour was impossibly done in a second. Eurytia wondered if Kurt understood her amazement, while Kurt was surprised that people could take an hour to channel magic. Soon, the two decided to sell the magic crystal for 50 units. Eurytia told Kurt to stay with her at an inn, but Kurt refused since he had something to do in the mountains. He wondered if one magic crystal was still worth 10 gold coins. Eurytia told him to rest before she returned. Kurt promised he would sleep well afterward and wished Eurytia to take care. Eurytia suddenly felt a flutter in her heart and found Kurt so cute that she wanted to marry him. Eurytia arrived at the border and the guards inspected her belongings. They asked where the magic crystals came from. In response, Eurytia showed them a pendant and requested to use the teleportation stone since she was headed to the royal capital. The guards were shocked when they realized Eurytia was an adventurer connected to the royal family. Despite her background, Eurytia knew it would be hard for anyone to believe where the magic crystals came from. In the Moros Kingdom, Eurytia entered a cafe and a pretty girl named Mimiko greeted her. Mimiko wondered if Eurytia was running low on money since she had stopped by. The place wasn't really a cafe but a military purveyor's magic item shop. Eurytia showed the magic crystals and Mimiko examined them. At first, seeing how dim they were, she said they'd only be worth 10 silver coins. But 30 minutes later, Mimiko claimed they could each be sold for 10 gold coins. Eurytia had expected them to be valued in silver, but Mimiko clarified that she meant gold. Eurytia asked why, and Mimiko explained that each magic crystal had 10 times more magical power than a normal crystal. She went on to say that the value of a magic crystal is usually judged by how much light it gives off. However, the ones Eurytia brought had a magic attribute that prevented the magic from leaking out, making them appear less bright. Mimiko had never seen anything like them before and asked where Eurytia had gotten them. Eurytia felt conflicted. She wanted to ask Kurt first, but she needed to sell the crystals. She then revealed that she had 49 more pieces of the same magic crystal. Mimiko silently broke into a cold sweat and decided to buy them all. Eurytia's mind became overwhelmed by the mental calculations and she sighed. She knew money could be distracting, but she had two requests. First, she didn't want to sell the magic stones outside of Mimiko's store, as others wouldn't appraise them accurately, including the craftsman. Second, she wanted to know who made the magic crystals. Eurytia was aware that Mimiko, the third court magician, had a high status, equivalent to that of an earl, but still refused to reveal the source of the magic stones. Mimiko clarified that it wasn't just a request but rather a demanding favor. Eurytia reminded her that she was no longer working for the royal family, and didn't have to follow Mimiko's orders. However, Mimiko knew Eurytia still used the privileges that came with her former position. Eurytia claimed she had no reason to share what she knew with Mimiko. Mimiko could only sigh and asked Eurytia to at least ensure that the person who made the magic stones remained in the country. Additionally, she wanted Kurt to know that he would be offered an honorary count rank, the position of director at the Royal Institute of Magicians, and the title of Baron. Eurytia promised to inform Kurt. Eurytia came out of the cafe feeling overwhelmed by the new titles and the large amount of gold that Kurt had just received. She couldn't understand what was happening. Trying to calm herself down, she walked away. When she returned to the agency, Killshell asked her what her business was. Euretia requested Kurt's personal information, but Killshell refused to share anything. Euretia had no choice but to use a certain privilege since she needed to learn more about Kurt. Meanwhile, a confused and injured Golnova wondered why fire wasn't coming from his sword. He had been hit by the tree monster's attack and asked Marlefis for healing. However, despite several attempts, Marlefis couldn't heal Golnova's wounds. Frustrated, Golnova started blaming their new member. Bandana watched the others panic, but to her it was something she had expected to happen. Back at the agency, Euretia learned that Kurt had once been part of the Dragon Fang of Fire. Killshell confirmed that Kurt had been fired. Euretia continued reading and found out that Kurt had also been let go from his wall repair work, but he still received 200 gold coins as payment. She asked what had happened. Killshell explained that Kurt had easily finished half of the castle wall by himself. Not only that, he repaired all 3 sides of the walls on his own. Euretia thanked Killshell for the information and gave her a pouch of shiny gold coins to pass on to Kurt. Killshell was overwhelmed by the amount, especially since she had thought 200 gold coins was already a lot. Euretia made it clear that there were 499 gold coins inside. She then instructed Killshell to keep Kurt's identity a secret, and Killshell promised that only a few staff members would know. Euretia knew Kurt's identity would eventually be revealed, but she was okay with hiding it for now. The next morning, Euretia returned to the mountains and discovered a house where Kurt greeted her. She looked confused as she wondered if there had been a log house there the day before. Euretia entered the house and was surprised to see that it was a proper one. Kurt asked if she had settled in, mentioning that he had prepared breakfast for her. Flustered, Euretia couldn't help but think how Kurt was acting like a housewife, especially with the apron he wore. When Kurt asked her how the house was, Euretia excitedly said it was amazing compared to her shabby tent. She then asked if Kurt had rested, and he confirmed that he had slept for 6 hours. Euretia began counting, and Kurt misunderstood, thinking she had caught him slacking off. Euretia told him not to work too hard. Kurt found her kind for letting him sleep an extra 2 hours and reminding him not to push himself. Euretia then asked where Kurt's food was. He explained that he would eat later since his job was to serve her first. She told him it was fine as long as he worked properly later and wondered what was wrong with him. She also reminded him that building the house and preparing food wasn't even his responsibility. Euretia then found Kurt's food and brought it to the table so they could eat together. She assumed Kurt's previous party had treated him poorly. She also informed him that she had deposited the money she earned from selling the magic stones into his account at the agency. She mentioned that she would return the 1 magic crystal she had borrowed to cover the fee. Kurt told her the magic crystals should belong to her since they came from her mountains, but Euretia insisted on returning it to him, saying the guilt would eat at her otherwise. Euretia started eating Kurt's cooking and found the food delicious. She excitedly asked where the eggs came from. Kurt told her they were the same chicken eggs she had bought from town, and asked if she didn't like his cooking. Euretia exclaimed it was the opposite, saying it was unbelievably good. Kurt was happy that she praised his cooking and mentioned that he had just used a regular pan. When she saw the toast with honey, she tried it and said it tasted even better than she expected. In her mind, Euretia listed all of Kurt's non-combat skills, which he had been showing off lately. Suddenly, Euretia told Kurt that the person who had evaluated the magic crystals wanted him to become the head of the Royal Magic Engineering Research Institute, and would give him noble status. Kurt was shocked and asked where that even came from. Euretia explained that the person who wanted him was an imperial court magician who could be trusted. She then asked what Kurt planned to do. Kurt stayed calm and said it was an amazing offer, but he wanted to decline. He still hoped to be called back to his old party. Meanwhile, Bandana was enjoying her meal. Unlike her, Golnova was furious about the terrible food. Bandana found it amusing to see him complain, as she had expected this reaction since Golnova was used to someone else's cooking. Angry, Golnova stormed out of the restaurant without paying. When he got back to their base, Bandana was already there. She asked how the food from the famous restaurant was. Golnova called it trash and demanded the smoked meat that Kurt had made instead. Bandana laughed, reminding him that he had already eaten all of it and mentioned that she wished she had some too. Golnova, annoyed, swung his sword at Bandana and glared at her while she simply glanced away. He regretted not hiring Kurt as their party's cook, especially after eating the awful food in the capital. Bandana disagreed, saying that wasn't the issue. Golnova then mentioned how delicious the food had been in the last city, to which Bandana clarified that Kurt was the one who cooked it. Golnova was shocked, knowing that the chef in that city was known for not letting others into his kitchen. Bandana explained that after witnessing Kurt's skills, the famous chef had become meek and disappeared somewhere on his own. Golnova suddenly realized that Kurt had been cooking for the team all along. Frustrated, he ordered Bandana to bring Kurt back. Bandana agreed, but said she would need the tracking crystal. With a sigh, she left the base, passing by some soldiers along the way. She figured Golnova might get arrested soon due to the trouble he had been causing lately. In the past, Kurt had always cleaned up after Golnova's messes and apologized to the people affected. On top of that, Golnova's sword and Marlefus's staff could only use powerful magic, because Kurt maintained and adjusted them. Luckily, Marlefus wasn't around as she had been called back to the church. Meanwhile, Kurt and Eurytia returned to mining. Kurt found a spot where he could dig at an angle. He warned Eurytia about digging too deep, saying they might stumble upon a cave. They could be buried alive or at worst killed by underground gases. Kurt then marked a place and decided to dig alone. Eurytia realized she needed to do something too so she could pay off her debts with her own effort. They agreed to split up. Soon after, Eurytia found something on her own. She thought it was topaz, which could sell for at least 3 gold coins, and even more if Kurt turned it into a magic crystal. But she dismissed the idea, feeling that she still needed to repay Kurt and should earn her own way. Although she believed she was being independent, she ended up finding something where Kurt had marked. She convinced herself it was fine since she did the digging. She hoped she could clear her debts in one go. After some time, she went to check on Kurt and discovered an entrance to a mine. The inside was bright without any lamps, and the space was large enough to fit a carriage pulled by 2 horses. Kurt greeted her, saying he was finishing up. He apologized for only finding second-rate materials. Eurytia didn't mind considering the location, but then she spotted a crate full of sparkling gems. She wondered if they were silver or gold. Kurt casually mentioned they were mithril ores. Eurytia froze for a moment, staring at Kurt in disbelief. She couldn't believe such a valuable metal was right in front of her. Kurt explained that they were so common in his village they would just throw them away. Eurytia was stunned and started thinking about all the metal ores she knew. Since Kurt called mithril second-rate, she realized what he had been aiming for all along. Despite knowing, she took a deep breath and asked Kurt what he was really looking for. Kurt casually showed her something and said he was after orichalcum. Eurytia started sweating as she tried to calculate the price of such a thing. Kurt mentioned that it could easily be found by digging 7 kilometers deep. Eurytia remembered Mimiko once saying their world had a thick layer of bedrock about 5 kilometers underground, with precious materials behind it that would take humans 100 years to mine. Eurytia asked Kurt about his earlier warning about digging deep. Kurt explained that he was used to it since he knew how caves worked back in his village, but he had taken his time digging this time. Eurytia couldn't believe that Kurt called digging 7 kilometers in 8 hours taking some time, and on top of that, he had found the legendary orichalcum. She then asked where the hole was, since there was no sign of it. Kurt said he had filled it back up because it could be dangerous. Eurytia also realized that digging a tunnel out of nowhere should have been impossible. She looked at the other end of the tunnel and finally understood that Kurt had simply dug straight through the mountain. She lay on the ground, trying to make sense of it all. Worried, Kurt handed her a blanket. Meanwhile, Bandana was impressed to see Kurt working with someone who used to work for the royal family. She was glad that the Dragon Fangs of Fire Group had helped hide Kurt's true strength. She couldn't believe she had to take action already. She always knew it wasn't easy being the Great Sage's disciple. Later, Mimiko received a letter from Eurytia through a carrier pigeon saying she would bring a large amount of mithril and some orichalcum. Mimiko paused, thinking Eurytia must have found some pretty gems. She sent the pigeon back without replying and reread the letter, stunned by what Eurytia wrote. Meanwhile, Eurytia was approached by a man who told her to give up on paying her debt. But Eurytia, determined, crumpled the document, saying she now had the means to pay it off. She had refined the ores Kurt found and even used his tunnel through the mountains as a shortcut between the 2 cities. In return for allowing the Merchant Guild to use it freely, they agreed to handle all the tunnel's maintenance. Kurt admired how Eurytia managed to settle her debts and benefit the merchants. Not wanting to be idle, he decided to look for a new job at an agency. At that moment, a familiar voice called out. It was Bandana. Kurt was surprised to see her and asked about their other 2 teammates. Bandana explained that something had happened and she had also been kicked out of the party. Realizing Bandana was a top-notch ranger, Kurt knew rejoining the party would be difficult. Bandana assumed Kurt had given up on adventuring since he was heading to a job agency, but Kurt insisted he still wanted to return to the party. When she asked why, he replied that he admired Golnova, his mentor. Bandana gave a sad smile knowing that Golnova was now a wanted man. Bandana decided to let it go and advised Kurt not to take the next job aptitude test at the work agency. She explained that many mercenaries would be flooding the agency because a recent war had just ended, so they probably wouldn't have time for his test. Instead, she invited Kurt to consider working at her friend's workshop. Kurt's eyes lit up, realizing she meant a famous workshop known as an Atelier Meister. Bandana confirmed, explaining that an Atelier Meister workshop uses special technology and engineering, and only 15 exist in the entire country. Excited, Kurt asked if he could join, and Bandana, pleased, told him to go on his own since she was busy. These workshops produce and sell items like medicine, magical weapons, and tools. A licensing system oversees the production and distribution of these goods, and their owners, called Atelier Meisters, hold a status equal to a Viscount. Kurt was surprised to hear that one existed in the nearby city. He searched until he located Atelier Ophelia. He knocked on the door once, but there was no response. After a moment, he heard noises from inside, and a pretty short-haired girl with pointed ears opened the door. Stunned, Kurt found himself speechless, assuming she was the Atelier Meister. The girl looked concerned and asked if he was shocked to see an elf. Kurt quickly realized it was indeed uncommon. Elves were known for their long lifespans and their skill in water, wind, and light magic, and they typically lived near Yggdrasil in the Great Forest. Kurt asked if she was the Atelier Meister, but the girl firmly denied it. She introduced herself as Michelle, assistant to Ophelia, the Atelier Meister. Kurt introduced himself and agreed that Michelle likely wasn't the Meister, given her youthful appearance. Michelle then surprised him by saying she was actually 80 years old, causing him to raise his voice in disbelief. Apologizing for his reaction, he was met with Michelle's own apology, explaining that her master wasn't accepting commissions at the moment. Kurt mentioned he'd come after Bandana recommended it, and Michelle assumed he must be the helper they'd been expecting. With her master occupied, Michelle brought Kurt inside. As he entered, Kurt noticed a strange, pungent smell from further inside, which he assumed was from chemicals or poisons. However, he was shocked when they reached a messy, dirty kitchen that left him frozen in disbelief. Michelle apologized, asking him to clean up the kitchen first, and Kurt realized he'd been called over for house chores, not for workshop tasks. Michelle shared that her master usually handled the cleaning, but she'd been busy with a project for the last 3 weeks. Although she was good at cooking, she admitted she was terrible at cleaning afterward, calling herself useless. Kurt disagreed, saying everyone had things they struggled with, like himself. He wanted to be an adventurer, but had low combat ranks. Michelle bluntly responded that such low ranks would make it nearly impossible for anyone to become an adventurer, hitting Kurt right where it hurt. While she apologized, Kurt began to reflect on himself. At that moment, Ophelia called Michelle away, leaving Kurt alone in the kitchen. In no time, the once messy kitchen was sparkling clean. Kurt had finished the work in 30 minutes, wondering if he would have been dismissed if he'd taken any longer. Unsure what to do next, he decided to ask Michelle. He knocked on a door and heard a response, then opened it while apologizing for intruding. It turned out he really had intruded, as he found himself face to face with a girl in the middle of changing clothes. The two of them stared at each other in silence. The girl asked Kurt who he was. Flustered, Kurt turned away and introduced himself as the new helper. She then mentioned that Ophelia was in the basement. Kurt was about to leave when he noticed something unsettling on the girl's stomach. She told him it was a curse and asked if he knew anything about them. Kurt recalled learning a bit about curses as a child, when random goblin shamans would place curses on him after he picked herbs. He offered to take a look and after touching it noticed that the nerves around her stomach had already gone numb. Realizing her internal organs might be affected, he began to worry about her ability to eat. Just then, her stomach rumbled and she blushed in embarrassment. She apologized, but Kurt was relieved to see she still had an appetite. He decided to make her a meal. The girl shyly thanked him, her words coming out in stutters. Kurt chuckled, finding it odd that she felt embarrassed about her growling stomach but not about being seen undressed. Back in the kitchen, Kurt realized he had touched a woman for the first time, which distracted him so much that he tripped. Meanwhile, Eurytia visited Mimiko again in the capital. Mimiko greeted her with a dark, ominous expression, surprising Eurytia by mentioning that the commotion she caused had even reached the king's ears. Eurytia defended herself, saying she couldn't help it given that she had a huge amount of mithril and orichalcum with her. Mimiko asked if those were in the cart she'd brought along. Lifting the cover, Mimiko glared at Eurytia. Eurytia explained that the real ores were hidden under fakes. As Mimiko uncovered the fakes, she picked up a real ore, rendered speechless, and revealed more of the precious metals beneath. Eurytia had never seen Mimiko so shocked. Finally, Mimiko slapped her own face, composed herself, and instructed Eurytia to bring the cart to the back of the store. After a while, Mimiko finally calmed down. She finished calculating everything and the total for the ores came to 80,000 gold coins. She explained that she would need to pay it in installments. Eurytia trembled at hearing such an amount, thinking it was far beyond a big city's budget or even the annual salary of a royal court magician. Mimiko remarked that this amount could buy multiple mountains like the one Eurytia owned. Then, with some irritation, she demanded to know who had dug up all the ore. Nervously, Eurytia repeated Kurt's words to Mimiko, especially his refusal of any noble titles. Mimiko was still puzzled as to why such a skilled young man had been hidden away until now. Eurytia admitted she wasn't sure herself, only that Kurt had once belonged to the famous Dragon Fangs of Fire. Mimiko recognized the name. It was the party that fell apart after the leader became a wanted man. This was news to Eurytia, so Mimiko explained how Golnova had struck down a guard trying to arrest him for public disturbance. Hearing about Golnova, Eurytia finally understood why Kurt behaved so cautiously. She wondered why someone as talented as Kurt had been forced out by Golnova. She assured Mimiko that Kurt was a good person, mentioning that she'd tested him with Mimiko's method. Curious, Mimiko asked what she meant, and Eurytia explained she had checked if he would react aggressively if they slept in the same tent. Mimiko was surprised Eurytia had actually done it, but when Eurytia asked why, Mimiko dismissed it, quickly changing the subject by asking about her plans for Kurt. Eurytia expressed her wish to establish Kurt as an atelier meister. However, Mimiko warned that this would expose Kurt's identity and suggested that it might be best to keep some control over his actions. She also hinted that Eurytia could serve as his bodyguard. Still, they both wondered whether Kurt would agree to their plan. Kurt had just finished cooking a meal for the cursed girl when Michelle entered the kitchen with an older woman. Both of them froze as they took in the sight. Their once dirty kitchen was now gleaming as if it had been newly built. Kurt, suddenly anxious, asked if the woman with Michelle was Atelier Meister Ophelia. He quickly apologized for using the kitchen without permission, but the older woman didn't mind. She then noticed the porridge Kurt had cooked and was surprised to see the pot fixed. Kurt explained that the girl in the far room was hungry. Ophelia was shocked and asked if Kurt had really met the girl, urging him not to tell anyone about her. Her tone hinted at a bit of charm, which flustered Kurt. He couldn't help but agree to keep it a secret. As Ophelia commented on the pleasant smell of the food, Kurt offered to cook more for her, but she declined and handed him gold coins as payment instead. She told him to return the next day, and Kurt, surprised by the amount, exclaimed it was too much. Ophelia insisted that he deserved it, and Kurt thanked her sincerely, feeling genuinely grateful. Stepping outside, Kurt felt a sense of acceptance he hadn't felt before. While repairing walls and mining with Eurytia, he had felt useless. But thanks to Ophelia's kindness, he now felt recognized and determined to do his best for the next day's work. Meanwhile, Ophelia, reflecting on Kurt, called him a strange kid. She realized he possessed SSS ranks in both processing and repair skills, something she found impossible. Seeing his abilities, she wondered if he was a spy from another workshop or even the royal family. However, she dismissed the idea, as no one should have an SSS-ranked class. In the meantime, Michelle began to cry, fearing she'd be fired since Kurt had taken over her tasks. Ophelia reassured her that she wouldn't be dismissed. Meanwhile, a group of robed figures discussed how the princess was still alive. One man apologized, admitting that the third princess hadn't died yet, but another grew impatient and ordered them to ensure the princess's death. He insisted that Lieselot Homeros must be eliminated at all costs. Back at Ophelia's workshop, which had a peaceful-looking backyard, a cursed girl giggled while watching the birds outside. Ophelia entered the room with food and reminded the girl not to open the curtains, warning it would be troublesome if someone saw her. The girl apologized, addressing Ophelia as teacher. Ophelia felt nostalgic, remembering the days when she was the girl's homeroom teacher. The girl then asked if Ophelia had gotten any sleep. She was grateful that Ophelia was helping slow down the curse's effects, but felt guilty about it. She urged Ophelia to rest more, pointing out that she now had a helper. Ophelia confirmed that the two had met, vowing to keep the girl's existence a secret. She realized that her judgment had become clouded due to fatigue, lowering her guard by allowing Michelle to bring in a stranger that Bandana had referred to. She decided to scold Michelle later and reassured the girl not to worry. Then she gently reminded her to cover up her exposed belly. Ophelia recalled how it had been too late for the girl once she had snuck out of the castle. After the recent war ended, the girl, Lieselot Homeros, the third princess, and a child born from the union between the neighboring country's princess and King Homeros, had been cursed. She was a symbol of peace between the two nations. Ophelia made a promise to break the curse that was consuming Lisa. The touching moment was interrupted by the sound of Lisa's grumbling stomach. Embarrassed, Lisa exclaimed that she was reacting to the delicious smell. Ophelia wanted to check the porridge for poison, but Lisa was confident that Kurt wouldn't dare do such a thing. Ophelia reminded her that they had just met, but Lisa trusted Kurt, also saying that any poison wouldn't hurt as much as the curse inside her. Ophelia was still concerned, especially since the curse had been placed on Lisa in such a sneaky way, with the culprit still unknown. Lisa pleaded with her teacher to let her trust someone for once. Ophelia finally relented, allowing Lisa to eat the porridge Kurt had made. Lisa happily ate the porridge, commenting on how warm it was. But after a few bites, she suddenly clutched her stomach in pain and fell from her seat. Horrified, Ophelia concluded that Kurt had poisoned Lisa. Meanwhile, Eurytia was anxious, worrying that Kurt might refuse the idea of becoming an atelier meister because of his modest nature. Mimiko advised her to have Kurt take the aptitude test first, saying it was only a matter of time before he attracted unwanted attention once people discovered he had unearthed such rare ores. Eurytia didn't want that to happen and considered having Kurt intentionally fail the test. However, she felt uneasy about deliberately causing a good person to fail, especially when he didn't even realize his own potential. Mimiko suggested canceling the test altogether, but Eurytia declined. She planned to meet with Kurt soon because she wanted to discuss their future, so she needed a plan. Mimiko then remarked that Eurytia was acting strangely, noting that she wasn't the type to become so invested in a man she had only just met. Eurytia dismissed the idea, but Mimiko reminded her how she had shown Kurt her bare skin. Eurytia blushed, panicked, and quickly shut down, screaming in embarrassment. Mimiko chuckled, finally understanding what was happening. Eurytia demanded to know what Mimiko meant. Mimiko pointed out that Eurytia usually didn't mind being seen naked by a man, then playfully suggested that Eurytia might marry Kurt and protect him for the rest of her life. Eurytia froze as the thought crossed her mind, and a bright look appeared on her face for some reason. Mimiko claimed she was only joking, but Eurytia insisted they had just met and weren't even dating. On the other hand, Lisa had been cured of her curse. Ophelia was in disbelief and asked her student to calm down. Lisa excitedly said she was fine and showed her stomach, revealing that the curse's mark was gone. Ophelia was shocked and guessed that the pain Lisa had just experienced was from the curse being broken. Lisa then urged her to try the porridge. Ophelia took a spoonful and felt a strange sensation. Both her fatigue and sleepiness vanished. She was stunned. While it was possible for porridge to help with fatigue, curing curses was another matter. That kind of magic required an elixir, not a simple dish. She realized that Kurt's porridge had the same effects as the legendary elixir of life. Lisa then suggested they return somewhere, and Ophelia agreed so they could stop the war from breaking out. Later that night, Mimiko heard the door to her shop open and nervously asked Eurytia to greet the visitor for her. Eurytia went to check and found that it was Ophelia, looking for Mimiko. Ophelia had come to seek some advice but noticed Mimiko already had a visitor. Mimiko reassured her that it was fine since Eurytia could be trusted, calling her simple-minded. Ophelia knew Eurytia was a former adventurer working for the royal family. Mimiko mentioned that Ophelia knew this because she was an atelier meister. Ophelia decided to trust Eurytia. Then another person stepped inside the store and removed her cloak. Instinctively, both Mimiko and Eurytia knelt down. They were stunned to see the kingdom's third princess entering such a humble shop. Lisa greeted them with a cheerful smile. Seeing how cheerful Lisa was, Mimiko asked if the princess was feeling better, and Lisa confirmed it. Even Eurytia had thought Lisa was supposed to be overseas, but it turned out she had been hiding due to a curse. Eurytia couldn't believe that Mimiko had involved her in something so serious. Ophelia then got straight to the main topic. Someone was targeting Lisa's life. Eurytia realized that whoever was behind it might want to start another war, which she found alarming. Suddenly, Mimiko gave Lisa a warm hug, relieved that Lisa was alright. She guessed they had come to ask her to find out who had cast the curse. Loyal to the royal family, especially Lisa's mother, Mimiko promised to do whatever she could. Eurytia didn't know how close Mimiko was to Lisa's mother, so she decided not to get involved in the discussion about the curse for now. Mimiko then wondered why someone with a deadly curse would be eating so well. Ophelia gently reminded Lisa to eat slowly since she was still recovering. Mimiko guessed that Ophelia had already lifted the curse. Lisa happily exclaimed that she was fine now, all thanks to Kurt. Mimiko and Eurytia were stunned. Mimiko shot Eurytia a glare and angrily demanded to know what Lisa was talking about. Eurytia quickly suggested it might be someone else with the same name. Then Eurytia described Kurt to Ophelia, and the atelier meister confirmed it was indeed him, asking if they knew each other. Eurytia couldn't believe the coincidence. She was shocked to hear that Kurt had already met both an atelier meister and a princess. Curious, she asked what Lisa meant by thanking Kurt. Ophelia explained how Kurt was hired to clean the workshop, cooked some porridge for Lisa, and how that same porridge broke the curse. Eurytia gave up being surprised. She was used to Kurt's strange talents by now. Ophelia then asked who Kurt really was and if the porridge had been some kind of elixir. Eurytia was astonished to hear Kurt's porridge being compared to something so legendary. Mimiko went on to share how Eurytia had met Kurt a few days ago, and how he had dug up 70 kilograms of mithril and orichalcum in a single day by tunneling through deep bedrock. Ophelia, however, seemed doubtful, and even Eurytia looked like she had given up trying to explain. Mimiko then uncovered a nearby cart, making Ophelia fall silent for a moment. She couldn't believe it, but Eurytia confirmed that Kurt had dug it all up. Like a maiden in love, Lisa fully believed that Kurt had done it on his own. Eurytia sensed something strange and felt irritated. Even though she knew how carefree the princess was, it bothered her when Lisa spoke about Kurt. She tried to deny the jealousy bubbling inside her. Mimiko then asked them to focus on the main goal, identifying the curse's caster. She had 3 suspects in mind: Sanova Ristkats, the general of the kingdom's expedition forces, Tristan Menolf, the bishop of the Church of Poland, and Isadora Arkmama, the king's 3rd queen consort. Mimiko suspected that Tristan might have used some priests to tamper with the charms protecting Lisa's room. Meanwhile, as a queen, Isadora could move freely around the castle. Sanova was the least likely suspect, but they couldn't dismiss the possibility that he might have hired someone from the Thieves Guild. Ophelia then suggested setting a trap. Since Lisa was turning 15 and would soon leave the palace for a year of studies, as was tradition, it could be the perfect opportunity. If Isadora was the culprit, Lisa leaving the palace would make her act. However, sending Lisa to study at the church would be risky since Tristan was there. Mimiko then asked where Lisa should go to study. Ophelia suggested an atelier, and Mimiko assumed it would be her own. But Ophelia pointed out that using her own atelier wouldn't make for a good trap, so she proposed creating a temporary atelier and appointing a new atelier master. Mimiko caught on to the plan. They would set up a fake atelier master to stir up suspicion among the suspects, prompting them to take action. By doing so, they could carefully monitor their movements. Ophelia agreed and said they would choose someone with recent achievements to act as the atelier master, with her, an atelier meister, and Mimiko, a royal court magician, backing them. As they discussed their plan to find a solution, Eurytia joined the conversation. She rummaged through something and asked if the super rare magic crystal she was holding could be considered an accomplishment. Ophelia and Mimiko were shocked at the size of the crystal. No one, not even an experienced atelier meister, was supposed to be able to process one that large. Ophelia declared it an artifact and said that whoever processed it would surely become a true atelier meister. When Ophelia asked where Eurytia got it, Eurytia casually explained that Kurt had made it in just a minute or two while they were descending the mountains. The two high-ranking women in the kingdom couldn't believe what they were hearing. They were simply relieved to have their problem solved. Lisa then remarked on how beautiful the sunrise was outside. Later, Kurt went to the workshop and found it closed, wondering what had happened. Michelle appeared and explained that Ophelia had left shortly after Kurt, without leaving any instructions for him. Kurt started to worry again, thinking he might have done something wrong. Michelle apologized and told him there wouldn't be any work for him this time. Feeling down, Kurt walked back to town, disappointed to be out of a job after just one day. As he looked for something to eat, he noticed a crowd gathered around an announcement board. The notice talked about a mysterious new atelier meister recommended by Ophelia, the third royal court magician Mimiko, and the third princess. It also mentioned that the third princess would study under the mysterious atelier meister for 5 years once she reached adulthood. Kurt then realized that Ophelia had left for business reasons and he hadn't messed up after all. However, he was still jobless. Knowing Eurytia had already paid off her debts, he doubted he would see her anytime soon. As he ate and pondered his next job, he wondered if the tavern's kitchen needed a cook. Suddenly, he overheard a group nearby arguing about hiring a courier for an urgent task. Kurt listened closely as the three debated, frustrated that they didn't have enough time to find a courier before they needed to set off. He figured that if it was just carrying luggage, he could handle it. Still, he wished he could return to his old group, but after Bandana's dismissal, he knew that wasn't an option. Determined to prove himself, Kurt approached the noisy group and offered to help carry their things. The three paused and looked at him. This would be Kurt's first time working with a different party. He said he would be useless in a fight, but he could at least solve their problem. The girl glared at him, asking if Kurt was mocking them. She shouted that someone young and scrawny like him wouldn't be any help, but her teammates quickly silenced her. The man, who turned out to be her brother, apologized and explained that being their courier would be tough since they had to protect an iron golem weighing about 200 kilograms. Kurt sensed they might reject him, so he quickly assured them he could handle the weight, even offering to prove it by lifting the two men. The older brother tried to stop him, but Kurt easily lifted the black-haired man. Then, without hesitation, he also lifted the older brother, who wore heavy plated armor. The two men were stunned, and everyone around them applauded Kurt. After he set them down, they all agreed to let him join. They welcomed Kurt into their party, Sakura, and he felt relieved to have found a new job. The older brother was Kanz, a bruiser who preferred punching over using the sword he carried. The leader, Danzo, was a samurai, which he explained was the Eastern version of a swordsman. Sheena, the girl, was a ranger, and she mentioned they had another member named Vevanok, their usual courier. However, Vevanok had caught a cold and needed a week to recover. Kurt was surprised that the flu in the city seemed so serious since in the countryside where he was from, it was easily treated with medicine. Kurt formally introduced himself, hoping he could be helpful to the team. They were all impressed by his humility and happily accepted him. Seeing how kind they were, Kurt promised not to cause any trouble. Soon after, they finally reached their destination. Kurt felt nervous, as it had been a long time since he'd last gone adventuring. Suddenly, he panicked as a slime attacked him. Sheena quickly instructed him on how to kill it. Kurt tried to slash it, but his sword just bounced back, stabbing his own leg instead. Sheena asked what he was doing, then grabbed the short sword and killed the slime herself. Kurt thanked her and apologized. Sheena recalled him mentioning he wasn't good at fighting, and Kurt, feeling nervous again, assured her he was skilled at carrying things. Kanz reassured him not to worry as they would handle the fighting. Danzo reminded Kurt of his role as their courier and that they needed to keep him safe until they delivered the goods. Kurt was surprised that they weren't angry at him for his mistake. Their kindness was completely different from what he'd experienced with his previous teammates. Realizing he could finally be himself, he started to tear up. Sheena panicked and Cons blamed her, but Kurt quickly claimed he was fine and drank something. He explained it was just an infusion of medicinal herbs, as he couldn't afford magic potions. He was used to having a healer in the party, but this time his herbal infusions might be useful. Danzo then asked if everyone was ready and they continued forward. Meanwhile, Killshell received a new payment receipt for Kurt. She couldn't believe he had another one, especially so soon after the last. She thought she couldn't be surprised anymore, but the staggering amount of 10,000 gold coins left her stunned. Feeling weak, she wondered if she was imagining things. She checked the receipt again, and had to accept it was real. She couldn't believe Kurt had earned such an amount in such a short time. She thought about asking her seniors for help, but froze when Eurytia appeared. Eurytia casually shared that an additional 80,000 gold coins would be arriving soon. That was the final blow for Killshell, who swore not to tell anyone. Eurytia reassured her, saying she never doubted her. She then introduced Mimiko and whispered that Mimiko was the third court magician, asking her to handle Kurt's incoming payment. Overwhelmed by all this information, Killshell fainted. Meanwhile, Danzo warned Kurt to watch his steps. Sheena complained, saying those words should be aimed at someone like her instead. Danzo replied that it was because Kurt looked like a girl. Cons chimed in, saying Sheena should be the one warning them since she was the ranger. Sheena then searched for her lantern, and Kurt offered some goblin's gold, glowing spores from a fungus. With the area lit up, Kurt noticed that the cave seemed ready to collapse at any moment. He spotted something, and Sheena identified it as goblin droppings. Kurt remembered some unpleasant encounters with goblins. Cons reassured him they could handle the goblins as long as it wasn't a large group. The group continued exploring the cave, which turned out to be a network of ancient ruins. Just as Kurt noticed something strange, Sheena signaled for silence and pointed out a goblin ahead. She then drew back her knife, aiming for the goblin's neck. However, Danzo moved first, slicing the goblin cleanly in half with a lightning-fast draw. His move was so quick that Kurt couldn't even follow it, and he was amazed by the sharpness of Danzo's sword. Cons grumbled, but Danzo explained that the goblin was about to alert its friends. Kurt also admired Sheena's precision, finding everyone else dependable. Knowing there were goblins nearby, Cons hoped they would come across the golem soon. After a while, they stumbled upon a goblin nest. Sheena blamed Cons for jinxing them and suggested finding a different route. But then, Cons made a rookie mistake. His armor scraped against the wall, making a loud noise. Everyone froze at the blunder he made. In a panic, they sprinted away with Sheena scolding her brother for messing up. Cons urged Kurt to move ahead while he stayed behind to distract the goblins. However, there had been more goblins ahead of them. It was clearly a whole colony. Danzo ordered everyone to fight and hold their ground. Cons stayed silent, but Sheena complained that they had no chance of winning. Kurt then asked them to wait because he noticed something on the nearby wall. A hidden passage opened and everyone praised him. They were safe for the moment, but Sheena urged everyone to keep moving and signaled the other two men. They asked Kurt to search for an exit, and as they tried to put some distance between them and the goblins, the creatures broke through the hidden passage. They managed to find another one, and Sheena dragged Kurt inside. It was pitch black, and Sheena quickly shut the door behind them. Kurt asked what she was doing since Cons and Danzo were still outside. Sheena bluntly said she was aware. Cons told Kurt they couldn't find an exit with the goblins right behind them, and asked the younger two to move forward. Kurt insisted on staying to fight, but Sheena called him an idiot and reminded him he couldn't even kill a slime. She made it clear that he would only slow them down. Kurt then realized that even though Sheena wanted to stay and fight, she also knew she would only be a burden to her older brothers. In a solemn tone, Cons asked Kurt to take care of Sheena. He then turned to Danzo, asking if they could survive this. Danzo pointed out that they would either win or die in this situation. Cons apologized for dragging Danzo into his mess, but Danzo brushed it off, saying he had no regrets. It would be an honor to die fighting for his little sister. Danzo felt the same, believing that dying as a warrior would be a noble end. Both men were warriors to the core. They wouldn't regret their sacrifice even if it meant laying down their lives for their friends. Kurt's eyes filled with tears when he heard them call him a friend. Yet he felt useless, unable to help them in this situation. Sheena reassured him that the others were strong enough to handle it, then asked for the goblin's gold. She blew the spores from her hands, illuminating the darkness. But then she froze as the scene before them became clear. A cold sweat broke out on her brow as a dragon-like creature loomed in front of them. Her knees buckled as she realized that the enormous iron golem dragon could mean their deaths. What made it worse was that there were more than one of them in the room. The creatures known as golems were guardians of the dungeon meant to stop intruders from passing through. Sheena could only cry silently and tremble in fear in front of them. Meanwhile, Khans was holding off all the goblins outside. Danzo then sliced through the goblins with a single swift swing. Khans thanked Danzo, and the two kept smiling as they fought the goblins together. They were risking their lives to protect the young ones hiding behind a secret door. However, it was now all in vain as Sheena and Kurt were trapped with the dangerous golems. Back in the city, Eurytia led Lisa around while they searched for Kurt, and they ended up in front of the inn where Kurt was staying. Eurytia reminded Lisa not to mention her status as a princess to him. Lisa stayed under Eurytia's watch since it was the safest option. Lisa didn't care about her princess title when it came to her one and only hero, Kurt. She even asked Eurytia to call her by her name to avoid suspicions, but Eurytia refused, not wanting to risk being charged with treason and getting imprisoned for it. They obtained the key to Kurt's room from the manager, but when they got inside the room, Kurt was nowhere to be found. From the hallways, a sneaky bandana told them that Kurt had gone to the northeast cave with a party called Sakura. Eurytia quickly glanced behind her, but no one was there. She wondered who Bandana was and why Kurt had gone to the goblin-infested cave, which had recently been cleared by knights during a training drill. Lisa asked who had been outside, but Eurytia urged her to stay put. However, Lisa insisted on coming along. Eurytia called her unreasonable, but the princess fired back with the same accusation. Lisa reminded Eurytia that she was her bodyguard and that they should stick together. She promised not to be a burden. Eurytia sighed and agreed, telling the princess not to leave her side. Eurytia then resolved to scold Kurt and teach him a lesson later. Lisa's imagination ran wild, and she nervously asked what kind of lesson Eurytia had in mind for Kurt. Eurytia, confused, explained that it would just be a simple scolding. Lisa seemed disappointed, leaving Eurytia puzzled about what was going on with the princess. Eurytia then asked Lisa to just call her by her name, and together they set out to find Kurt. In a flashback, Sheena, looking eager, told her older brother that she wanted to become a ranger. She had already gathered the necessary gear and wanted to join Khans. However, Khans advised her to gain some experience first by hunting slimes and goblins. Sheena complained that goblins didn't pay well, but Khans warned her not to underestimate them. A single goblin might not be much of a threat, but a swarm could be dangerous. Sheena, curious about the world, wondered what it would feel like to face monsters. At 13, she became an adventurer. She made plenty of mistakes early on, but it had been 3 years since Khan and Danzo accepted her. Now that she was getting the hang of adventuring, they had taken a quest to deliver raw materials for an iron golem. She wished they had turned down the quest from the beginning. Sheena apologized to Kurt for dragging him along, admitting they couldn't do anything against the golems. She knew that even if they tried to go back, the goblins would kill them. Kurt grabbed her and insisted they could escape. He then decided to move the golems out of the way. He approached the Iron Dragon golems until one attacked with its tail. Sheena cried out Kurt's name in despair, but Kurt easily dodged the dragon's tail and landed safely. Sheena was left confused by what she saw. Kurt calmly walked toward the Iron Dragon golem and stabbed it. Sheena was even more confused when nothing happened at first. Then a few seconds later, the golem's tail fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Sheena stared in disbelief. The Iron Dragon golem then tried to crush Kurt with a body slam, but he casually lifted the severed tail and pointed it upwards. The Iron Dragon golem was impaled by its own tail and shattered into pieces after its core was destroyed. Sheena kept watching with a confused expression as Kurt stepped back slightly, not even breaking a sweat, and wondered what had just happened. Her attention was entirely on Kurt. She questioned what kind of knife he was holding for it to remain unbroken, assuming he had used it to dispel the golem's magic. On top of that, he had used the Iron Dragon golem's own tail to pierce its core. She couldn't believe this was the same boy who once struggled to kill a slime. There were so many things in the world she didn't understand, and she was learning about them for the first time. Yet the boy standing in front of her only added more questions to her mind. Kurt reassured Sheena not to worry, saying he was the best when it came to mining iron golems. Sheena's question from 3 years ago resurfaced in her mind because of Kurt. Meanwhile, Eurytia couldn't get Bandana out of her thoughts and guessed she might be one of Mimiko's underlings, but Bandana should have stayed hidden. What troubled her even more was that Kurt had joined an unfamiliar adventurer party. She worried about the kind-hearted and trusting Kurt. When Eurytia and Lisa reached the cave entrance, Eurytia warned Lisa to hide if any monsters appeared. Inside, they were surprised by how brightly lit it was, and based on the footprints, they concluded that 4 people had entered. Lisa confirmed that one set of footprints matched Kurt's boots. Eurytia was a bit startled but brushed it off, as she recognized his tracks too. Lisa then suggested she take the lead and used her sense enhancement. Eurytia found Lisa's skill impressive, though it was strange to see a princess sniffing around. Oddly enough, Lisa seemed to know which path Kurt had taken. Eurytia was amazed by Lisa's senses and couldn't help but wonder how Lisa recognized Kurt's scent. Realizing the two might have been close, she suddenly felt a pang in her chest. That was jealousy, Eurytia. Lisa mentioned remembering Kurt's shampoo scent from when he broke her curse. Eurytia felt relieved to hear this, but the strange feeling lingered. Imagining Kurt's routine, she pictured him taking a bath and realized just how well he took care of himself. Snapping out of her thoughts, Eurytia noticed Lisa giving her a curious look. Lisa then mentioned that she smelled blood ahead. The two rushed forward, worried about Kurt. Eurytia urged Lisa to stay back while she checked some fresh bloodstains and nearby goblin corpses. She warned Lisa about the gruesome sight, but Lisa reassured her, saying she wasn't the spoiled princess people thought. Eurytia asked her to brace herself, as they'd likely see more goblin bodies ahead. They continued down the path until they reached a broken hidden passage. Suddenly they heard loud noises and assumed Kurt was in a fight. Eurytia told Lisa to stay where she was and stay alert. Before Eurytia left, Lisa cast a buff spell on her, and Eurytia quickly felt the effects. She thanked Lisa and rushed into the battle. When she arrived, she saw Khans and Danzo fighting against a goblin army. Counting at least 20 goblins, she swiftly cut down most of them. She noticed 2 men who were badly injured, but Kurt was nowhere to be seen. Eurytia asked if they were from the Sakura party. Khans confirmed they were and asked who she was. Ignoring the question, Eurytia asked where Kurt was. Khans explained that Kurt had escaped through a hidden door. Still skeptical, Eurytia kept her guard up, introduced herself, and offered to help them. Watching from a distance, Lisa felt anxious. But knowing Eurytia was a former adventurer who once served the royal family, she trusted she would be okay. Within a minute, the goblins were defeated. Eurytia ran to the hidden door and forced it open. Inside, she found Sheena and asked who she was and where Kurt was. Sheena pointed to Kurt, who was still surrounded by Iron Dragon golems. Seeing the broken golems, Eurytia wondered what had just happened. Just then, Kurt appeared, popping out of nowhere like a mole. Surprised, Eurytia quickly checked on him. Kurt reassured her that he was fine and was more worried about Danzo and Khans. Eurytia assured him that the 2 men were safe and unharmed. Kurt was so relieved he almost cried. He handed her some of his herbal infusions to give them, and then he himself fainted. Eurytia noticed that Kurt had no visible injuries and assumed he was just exhausted. She lifted him gently and praised him for his efforts. Then she remembered Sheena and found her trembling next to Lisa. Eurytia asked her what happened. With a shaky voice, Sheena explained that Kurt had claimed experience in mining iron golems and had destroyed all the Iron Dragon golems. She couldn't believe Kurt had managed to defeat them by simply striking a dagger into their joints. And he'd done it all on his own. Eurytia found it hard to believe too, since Kurt was ranked lowest in all combat-related skills. But then she recalled a story of a man with a G-ranked sickle skill, but an S-ranked mowing skill, who defeated a wild rose dragon using a mowing sickle. She'd once thought it was a funny story, but after seeing Kurt's feat, it might be the same with him in mining. Lisa then asked if this was Kurt's true power. Eurytia replied anxiously, realizing it was Lisa's first time witnessing Kurt's abilities. As usual, Lisa reacted like a maiden in love, as though expecting no less from her hero. Eurytia began to doubt if Lisa was really a princess. Danzo used Kurt's herbal infusion and found it incredible, as it healed every wound down to the smallest scratch. Khans called it high quality and said Eurytia shouldn't have wasted it on them. But Eurytia didn't mind at all. However, Khans insisted on repaying her with the reward they'd receive from their quest. Eurytia appreciated the thought, but first she informed them that the guild had issued a warning about goblins fleeing the cave because the knights were conducting drills nearby. Khans hadn't known, as another member had accepted the quest. However, Danzo suspected that Vevanok had led them into a death trap. Still, he didn't forget to thank Eurytia for saving them. Just then, Kurt returned with Lisa carrying a huge piece of the iron golem. Eurytia was shocked to see someone with such a small frame carrying something so massive with ease. Khans cautioned Kurt not to push himself too hard, but Kurt shrugged it off, saying it was normal work for a courier. Eurytia now understood why Kurt had been looking for a courier job, and felt annoyed that he and Lisa were addressing each other so casually. She remembered how Kurt had effortlessly built a log house, dug through mountains, and excavated things on his own. Kurt then asked Lisa to stop speaking to him so formally, but Lisa insisted, explaining that he was her savior. Kurt recalled only making porridge for her, thinking it was no big deal. Lisa realized Kurt didn't understand her situation at all. But because of him, she was now alive, free from fear and loneliness. For her, Kurt was undoubtedly her savior. Eurytia couldn't stand watching Lisa cling to Kurt. Khans then told everyone to start heading back to the city. However, Eurytia stopped them first, since the Sakura party, especially Sheena, had already caught a glimpse of Kurt's true potential. Eurytia wanted Sheena close by to keep an eye on her. Eurytia then asked Kurt for a favor, and he readily agreed to help with anything he could. Seeing how eager he was, Eurytia worried about his future, imagining someone might ask him for marriage, especially with a certain hungry princess nearby getting ideas. Eurytia then mentioned that a new atelier was being established. Kurt replied that he already knew about it from reading the kingdom's newspaper. Eurytia was pleased and shared that she was heading up the specialist team of adventurers. Kurt congratulated her, and Eurytia invited him to work in the atelier with her. His face brightened and he asked if she was certain. Eurytia assured him, explaining that Ophelia had personally recommended him after his great work at her workshop. Kurt was happy to hear this but hesitated, concerned about leaving the Sakura party behind. Cons and Danzo told him not to worry about them. Eurytia added that they were still understaffed and could use a few adventurers. She extended the invitation to the Sakura party as well, promising a generous reward, though it wasn't specified. The three adventurers were surprised. Sheena stayed quiet, but Cons and Danzo exchanged a glance, saying it was the best offer they could have hoped for. Eurytia felt relieved that the new arrangements were settled. As for Kurt, she and Mimiko wanted to keep him close for his protection, while Lisa and Ophelia intended to use him to attract those plotting against Lisa. Their goals aligned, but Eurytia felt guilty for not being honest. Kurt wouldn't just work at the atelier, he would actually be the atelier meister. Watching Kurt and the others looking so pleased made her feel even worse about the secret. Then Cons noticed Sheena was unusually quiet. She said she was fine and offered to scout ahead. Cons asked Eurytia to understand his sister, saying she might be unsettled from seeing the iron golems. Eurytia agreed. She told the others that the golems had killed each other, although only she and Sheena knew Kurt had actually taken them down alone. Back in the city, Kurt received his share of the reward from the quest. Eurytia reminded everyone they would leave the next morning. The men wanted to celebrate their new job, but Sheena told them to clean up first. Kurt was happy to work with them again. While they waited for the others, Eurytia saw a chance to make Kurt take the aptitude test. However, Kurt worried about the agency being busy lately, and since it was already late, he thought the agency would be closed and he couldn't take the test. Lise then spoke up, saying that as an atelier meister, he had a noble privilege, so the agency couldn't refuse him. Kurt looked confused, explaining that he wasn't the atelier meister, just someone working under one. Lisa and Eurytia quickly corrected him, saying the privilege also applied to members. Eurytia added that there wouldn't be an agency in the next city where he could take the test. As Eurytia scolded Lisa, Cons and Danzo urged Kurt to take the test instead of just waiting. Realizing he had been wanting to take the aptitude test for non-combat skills, Kurt decided to go ahead with it. Soon, Killshell greeted Kurt and was happy to see him again. She was glad he was managing well with his jobs. Kurt remembered feeling embarrassed when Killshell had tested him for combat-related skills and his scores had been low. Killshell then led him to a room where Mimiko waited. Mimiko greeted him and Kurt was surprised to see that the examiner looked like someone his age. Mimiko introduced herself as Kurt's examiner for the non-combat aptitude test. Kurt doubted whether Mimiko was a professional, given that she looked younger than him. However, he quickly realized she was the court magician he'd heard about. Mimiko confirmed this, and Eurytia mentioned that Mimiko had also appraised the ores he had dug up. She whispered to him not to be deceived by Mimiko's youthful appearance. Mimiko overheard and asked Eurytia what she meant by that. Mimiko then explained that she'd been eager to meet Kurt after Ophelia praised him and seeing the ores he found. She told him not to be nervous, reassuring him they were all friends through Ophelia and Eurytia. Kurt was surprised and asked if Eurytia really thought of him as a friend. Eurytia seemed a bit taken aback and asked if Kurt didn't want to be friends. Kurt quickly exclaimed he'd be thrilled to be her friend. Just then, Lisa joined in, asking if she could be friends with Kurt as well. Kurt happily agreed, though Lisa secretly hoped for something more than friendship. Mimiko and Eurytia were in disbelief at what they were witnessing, while Kurt felt overjoyed to have friends and new teammates since leaving his village. Later, Kurt anxiously awaited his non-combat aptitude test results. Mimiko soon announced them. He'd achieved a B rank in cleaning, cooking, and mining, while everything else was rated C rank. Kurt was shocked to hear he'd scored B's and C's. Hearing his excited shout, Lisa and Eurytia asked about his results. Kurt eagerly shared them with Eurytia, hardly able to believe it himself, and thanked God for his good fortune. Lisa then told them to head to the tavern to meet the Sakura party. Eurytia told them to go on ahead, giving Lisa the chance to cling to Kurt. She pulled him outside, clearly trying to get closer and deepen their relationship. Eurytia couldn't believe what she was witnessing. A noble was seriously pursuing a commoner. Mimiko suggested Lisa might even consider being a mistress, which made Eurytia ask what she meant. With the two women now alone, Eurytia thanked Mimiko for tricking Kurt with the test results. Mimiko explained that the work agency's aptitude rankings could only measure from G to SS, with anything higher marked as triple S, meaning immeasurable. Eurytia realized what Mimiko was hinting at. Mimiko then confirmed that Kurt had a triple S rank in all categories. On top of that, Kurt's latent magical power far exceeded hers. But since he had no natural talent in using magic, he wouldn't be able to cast spells at all. Mimiko was relieved she had personally done the test for Kurt. It would have been risky if someone else had learned about his abilities. However, they hadn't noticed that Killshell was still in the room, covering her ears with her hands. Eurytia quickly grabbed her and asked if her ears felt cold. Mimiko leaned toward Killshell's ear, repeating Kurt's impressive abilities and stressing that it would be dangerous if this information got out. She also hinted at something bad happening to Kurt if word spread. Killshell quickly insisted she hadn't heard a thing, vowing to keep the secret to her grave. Meanwhile, at the Church of Paran, Marlethis looked grim as she tried to leave the building. She had been excommunicated for reasons unknown to her and couldn't believe it, especially after everything she'd done for the church's reputation. However, she had recently attacked some civilians over a minor dispute. Just then, someone called her over and informed her that the bishop wanted to see her. Marlethis smiled, assuming that Tristan, the current bishop, would listen to her pleas because he valued her greatly. She was led to a room glimmering with gold in every direction, leaving her speechless. Tristan greeted her with a literal golden smile, his teeth coated in gold. Marlethis complimented his impressive room and Tristan offered her some wine. She was surprised, noting the wine was from a rival country. Tristan admitted it was made by heretics but loved its taste nonetheless. He offered her a cup, then corrected himself, referring to her as the future priestess. Marlethis was shocked and wondered if she had heard him correctly. Tristan explained that he valued her highly and could overlook the minor crime she committed. She accepted the wine and realized that the bishop seemed to be colluding with other priests. Pleased by her quick insight, Tristan asked her to fulfill a request as the future priestess. Using Kurt's favorite phrase, Marlethis agreed to do anything. Tristan then ordered her to assassinate the kingdom's third princess, Liselot. Marlethis couldn't believe what she'd just heard and fell to her knees, not from shock but because the wine had been spiked. Tristan reassured her that the poison wouldn't kill her, but would make her unable to eat, causing her to starve. He promised to end her suffering if she completed the task. Gritting her teeth in anger, Marlethis swore to complete the mission for Tristan, deciding to play the obedient servant and endure. Meanwhile, the usual group traveled by carriage with Khan's feeling unwell, not from motion sickness but a hangover. He didn't want to be scolded as he'd been drinking to entertain Eurytia. Eurytia remarked that the wine tasted wonderful. Watching her brother flirt, Sheena delivered a punch to Khan's, causing him to vomit everything he'd eaten again. Eurytia was relieved to see Sheena starting to feel better, though she could still sense some distrust in her gaze. Kurt then noticed something familiar about the city walls they were approaching. After taking a closer look, he realized they were the same walls he had repaired before. Eurytia noticed Kurt looking worried and asked him what was wrong. Kurt explained that he had failed in his previous job. However, he observed that the repair work on the wall had been extended. Kurt wondered if an earthquake had occurred, while Eurytia remembered how quickly Kurt usually finished his tasks. Once they were inside, Eurytia confirmed that Kurt had completed 2 sides of the wall on his own. She suggested that the workers might be using a different method than Kurt. Kurt guessed they were reinforcing the wall to withstand an attack by 14 dragons. Eurytia knew Kurt was misunderstanding something. As they entered through the gates, Lisa explained that the place had once been a fortress but was now being transformed into a frontier town. It didn't yet have a name or governor, and since it was close to demon territory, the military was running it. As a frontline town, it received support not only from their country, but also from allied nations. The goal of establishing an atelier with an atelier meister was to help the town grow. Kurt assumed the newly appointed atelier meister was someone important, unaware that it was actually him. In her thoughts, Eurytia believed that the curse couldn't strike again in a distant place unless someone dared to approach and attack again. Sheena watched Eurytia suspiciously, realizing how easily she and her group were drawn to Eurytia. It wasn't just because Eurytia was kind enough to hire them. She was likely keeping them close to prevent any information about Kurt and the cave incident from leaking. Sheena knew they were dealing with unusual people and she found Kurt particularly intimidating. Just then, they reached their destination, and Kurt pointed it out to Sheena. She responded coldly and walked away, noticing a large construction site. She followed the others through a wide curtain and was shocked to see an expansive plot of land. The men worried about starting construction from scratch since they had little experience. Aware of this, Eurytia asked Kurt to build the atelier himself. The men were concerned for Kurt, but Eurytia ignored them and left everything, including the design, up to him. The men doubted Kurt's architectural skills, but he claimed he knew a bit about it. Sheena couldn't believe what she was hearing. Kurt said he could build a log house in a day, but a more refined one would take 3 days. The men remained confused, and Eurytia promised to explain later. She then asked Kurt what materials he needed, and he gave her an extensive list. Sheena peeked at the list and noticed amethyst, ruby, and sapphire among the items. She doubted they could gather the amounts he specified, and she began to suspect they were involved in something shady. She was sure the other two wouldn't be convinced to leave Kurt alone. Eurytia then instructed Kurt to ask the innkeeper for meals, but Kurt hesitated, feeling it would be an imposition. Eurytia urged him to take care of himself and not skip meals. She apologized to the others for the wait and offered to take them to the inn. Sheena then resolved to do something bold, planning to let her brother and Danzo escape. Later at the inn, everyone sat down to talk. Sheena noticed no one else was around and quickly asked about Kurt and what had happened in the cave. Khans asked what she meant, and Sheena confessed that it was Kurt who defeated all the Iron Dragon golems. Danzo seemed like he had an idea, but Khans looked confused. Sheena explained that Kurt took down the Iron Golems with just a knife. Khans said that was impossible since Kurt couldn't even kill a slime, but Danzo patted him on the back. Sheena then asked who Kurt and the others really were. Eurytia decided to explain. She revealed that she was an ex-adventurer who used to work directly for the royal family. After her, Lisa introduced herself fully, showing her royal dagger as proof that she was the third princess of the kingdom. When they saw the royal family's emblem, the Sakura party tried to show respect, but Lisa asked them to stop and treat her normally as she was in hiding. Khans guessed that Kurt might also be someone important, but Eurytia reassured them that Kurt was neither royal nor noble. She admitted she didn't know much about him except that his combat aptitude was ranked G, but in all other skills he measured at triple S rank. Khans now understood why someone as small as Kurt could do so much, even if it sounded unbelievable. Sheena reminded everyone that Kurt had actually defeated the Iron Golems and had casually referred to it as mining, not fighting. Lisa then intervened, saying she wouldn't stop them from leaving if they found the story too absurd. She looked to Danzo, their leader, to hear his decision. Sheena suggested they should leave since it was too much for them to handle. After some thought, Danzo gave Khans a silent look. Khans then hugged Sheena, quieting her. Danzo asked Lisa to continue their discussion. Lisa confessed that her life had been in danger. She admitted that she should have died already, but Kurt had cured her curse with a simple bowl of porridge. Kurt didn't know her real identity, nor had she asked for his help. Still, he knew about her curse and treated her without asking for anything in return. She felt obligated to repay his kindness. Eurytia commented on how Kurt was a genuinely nice person, admitting that he had no idea about everything they just shared with the party. Sheena snapped, insisting that Kurt needed to learn some self-awareness, especially after he defeated the Iron Golems and simply called it mining. She worried that his skewed sense of normalcy would mislead or even harm others in the future, fearing that people would take advantage of him. In her view, they were just using Kurt for their own benefit. Eurytia admitted she understood Sheena's concerns, since she herself had only known Kurt for 6 days. Everyone fell silent, surprised when the Sakura party members assumed Eurytia and Kurt had known each other for years. Eurytia then burst out, saying she'd been wrestling with the same thoughts for days. She wanted Kurt to gain some self-awareness so she wouldn't constantly have to worry. This opened the others' eyes, and they began to sympathize with her. Eurytia apologized, explaining that this was the only way to keep others from discovering and exploiting Kurt's unique abilities. She wanted to protect both Kurt and Lisa and asked for the Sakura party's help. Lisa personally requested they join the team, asking them to support Kurt, not as a princess, but as his friend. Danzo reminded them he was an adventurer, not a knight who obeyed royal orders. He said he'd only pledge his loyalty to the new Atelier Meister once he deemed them worthy, but he admitted that Kurt was already a trusted comrade, and they couldn't just stand by and ignore his situation. Khans agreed and asked who exactly they were supposed to protect. Eurytia was relieved that Kurt had such good friends and revealed that Kurt was the Atelier Meister. She clarified that Kurt himself didn't know this yet. The group was stunned and Sheena grew even angrier, feeling he had been deceived. She walked away saying she needed some fresh air, and Khans advised Eurytia not to worry, suggesting they give his sister some space. Outside, Sheena wrestled with her feelings about Kurt's situation. She went to check on him and found surprising progress on the atelier's construction. Baffled, she asked if Kurt had done all the work himself. Kurt replied that his mining was B-ranked, though Sheena doubted it, beginning to understand Eurytia's worries. Kurt noticed something was bothering her and asked why she had come. Sheena confessed she wished Kurt were less naive, fearing that if left alone, others would exploit his talents since he didn't even know the truth about himself. She told him about her frightening experience in the cave, admitting she could have died. Kurt responded that he wouldn't know what to do if anything happened to her, which astonished Sheena, as he didn't seem to think of himself first. Feeling she had no other option, Sheena decided she had to protect him because, after all, they were comrades. The next morning, Sheena realized that Danzo was missing. Khans explained that Danzo had gone back to Samaela to check on Vevanok. Shortly after, Kurt knocked on their doors announcing he would return to the atelier. Khans offered to assist him, though Sheena doubted Kurt needed any help. Since Lisa and Eurytia had already gone out for supplies, Sheena asked Khans what they should do for the day. Khans suggested they explore the town to get familiar with it. Meanwhile, Danzo sat quietly on a bench until an information broker approached him. She informed him that Vevanok was a scoundrel who often put his team in dangerous situations, only to claim all the rewards if they failed. She handed him a document with the rest of the information. The broker, who Danzo knew well, asked him not to hold any resentment against her and hoped he would trust her. The document revealed that Vevanok was nicknamed the Thousand Faces and included a list of teams he had sabotaged. She explained that the client was a business rival of Vevanok's, whose quests often overlapped with his. Danzo didn't hesitate to pay Bandana for her help. She thanked him and left as if nothing had happened. Just then, a coachman stopped his carriage nearby and asked Danzo if he was headed towards Samaela. Elsewhere, Vevanok was forcing a woman to drink with him. He was already celebrating, expecting a large payment soon. He seemed pleased to hear that Danzo and the others had survived and even joined the team associated with the new Atelier Meister. Vevanok had something planned against them. Just then, Danzo appeared as a surprise customer, making Vevanok panic. Danzo noticed Vevanok looked well and asked how much he was earning this time. Vevanok stammered, unable to answer clearly. Danzo shot him a death glare and Vevanok bolted in fear. Danzo apologized to the waitress and covered the bill. Vevanok dashed into a nearby alley but tripped over a wire someone had set up. Panicked and on the ground, he watched as Danzo caught up to him. Danzo revealed he had suspected something was wrong ever since they ran into the Goblin Colony, believing a clever person like Vevanok wouldn't have missed the night's drill warning. Vevanok insisted he had no idea and begged for forgiveness, calling them comrades. Danzo sneered, calling Vevanok pathetic and mocking him with his nickname. Realizing he'd been caught, Vevanok called Danzo a fool for being tricked all along and taunted him for pretending to be a comrade. Unsheathing his sword, Danzo swore he wouldn't let Sheena and Kurt end up in the same situation. He told Vevanok to die and swung his sword at his neck. But Danzo stopped his blade an inch from Vevanok's neck, causing Vevanok to faint from shock. Danzo sighed and walked away. Bandana, who had watched everything, thought it was troublesome that Vevanok had been left alive. Just then, robed figures appeared to retrieve the unconscious Vevanok. Bandana recognized them as the Phantoms, a shadowy group under Mimiko's command. She wondered if they already knew about Vevanok's schemes. Suddenly, a courier crow delivered a letter to her. Reading it, she was shocked to see that Marlefis had fallen so far and now looked as cursed as Lys. Deciding not to interfere with her master, Bandana made plans to head to Kurt's hometown, even though it was far away. Meanwhile, Marlefis was seen vomiting in a hallway. She looked lifeless as she stared out the window. She knew that the third princess was in town and that she had to kill her. Soon after, Danzo returned to the unnamed frontier city. Sheena asked how things went with Vevanok, and Danzo simply replied that the guy had left their party, saying he wasn't interested in their new job. Khan felt a bit disappointed, knowing Vevanok's courier skills were top-notch. Sheena didn't mind at all, as she thought of Vevanok as a flirt anyway. Danzo then remembered how Bandana had told him that Vevanok's client had learned about the failed task. At least now, they wouldn't have problems with double-booked quests. Eurytia then checked in and noticed everyone was present. She announced they would go see the new atelier. Everyone was left speechless, and Eurytia asked what was wrong. Khan's asked if it was really finished, and Danzo mentioned it had only been 3 days. Eurytia assured them not only was it finished, but it would also be 1,000 times better than anything they'd imagined. She told them to get ready. They all walked out of the inn, and Sheena asked if they really needed to prepare. Meanwhile, Danzo felt guilty for not helping with the construction. Eurytia reassured them it was fine. When they reached their destination, they were surprised to see a gate with a small garden just beyond it. Eurytia started to panic, telling everyone to stay calm, but Sheena turned the advice back on her. Even Danzo and Khans were shocked at how much had changed, so much that even the style seemed different. Lisa was thrilled, calling it a perfect love nest for her and Kurt. Eurytia led the group and opened the gates. Inside stood an impressive mansion, complete with a fountain and an elegant garden. Everyone was too awestruck to speak for a moment. The main door opened and Kurt appeared to greet them. Eurytia asked if he'd really finished it all within 3 days. Kurt smiled and apologized for taking so long. With a bright grin, he announced that the atelier was officially complete. With all the new things they'd learned, Khans couldn't help but feel as if they were dreaming. Sheena noticed a peach tree in the garden, already bearing fruit, which surprised her. Khans asked again if they were truly awake, and Danzo agreed. It felt unbelievable. They could hardly believe they were now living in a mansion instead of the modest workshop they'd originally imagined. Just 4 days earlier, they had been homeless. Kurt, however, worried that the mansion might not be impressive enough for the princess. Lisa tried to shout in excitement, but Eurytia quickly stopped her, reminding her to act like her ordinary self. Eurytia reassured Kurt, telling him she was sure the princess would be pleased. Kurt then took everyone on a tour inside the mansion. He mentioned there were 2 basement levels, which confused Sheena because she'd only noticed one level a few days earlier. Kurt jokingly suggested he might cover up the extra level, but Eurytia stopped him. As they explored, Eurytia noticed a light that wasn't from a flame. Kurt explained that it was powered by a magic stone he had created, and would last for at least a year. They soon arrived at the second basement level, which Kurt had transformed into a spacious room. Everyone was shocked by how large it was. Kurt explained that he had used the entire land area, not just the building area. The members of the Sakura party were left speechless. Suddenly, Kurt offered them tea, thinking they might feel uncomfortable due to the air circulation underground. Eurytia hoped they would manage, as this was only the beginning of the tour. Sheena then apologized to Eurytia for her previous words, and Danzo and Cons also expressed their wish to face challenges together moving forward. Eurytia felt happy, knowing they had finally become true comrades. Kurt, pleased to see them all getting along, was about to continue when Lisa told him to ignore them and keep showing her around. In the basement's first floor, there was a sewing room, training room, dressing room, and a bathroom. A precious stone in the room supplied water for the bath and the fountain outside. Lise claimed she had provided the stone, and Kurt thanked her for it. Eurytia told the others it was a national treasure-level stone. Kurt promised to return it once he found a sapphire on his own, but Lisa didn't mind supplying more if needed. The others were shocked by how casually the two treated such a valuable item. In the semi-basement Kurt had set up, there was an office room. On the first floor, he arranged a dining room, kitchen, and reception room. Each floor also had several open rooms he could remodel as needed. Cons was slowly adapting to Kurt's surprising actions, and though Eurytia said the same, she still felt surprised every time. Kurt then led them to the second floor, where he had already prepared beds and furniture for each person. Sheena was delighted to learn they each had their own rooms, as she found it inconvenient to share space with others. The room was perfect for her, and Kurt had even made the beds from griffin feathers he'd received from Eurytia. The girls enjoyed the softness of the bedding, while the guys wondered how much such luxurious materials might cost. Little did they know, Kurt's surprises were far from over. Eurytia suggested they decide on which rooms to use. Kurt asked when the Atelier Meister and the princess would arrive since he had already prepared their room. Lisa was pleased to hear he'd especially readied her room, but Eurytia told her to keep quiet and suggested using the middle room among the three adjacent ones. Lisa, in frustration, asked if Eurytia was purposely keeping her from the room Kurt had made lovingly for her. Eurytia told her to stop with the bloody tears and explained to Kurt that the Atelier Meister and princess were too busy to come. She then asked Danzo to take the room next to Lisa's while she would use the other one. Sheena and Cons also chose their rooms. Kurt pointed to the room he'd prepared for the Atelier Meister and princess, leaving no room for himself on that floor. Cons then asked where Kurt's room would be, and he explained he'd set one up next to the kitchen, under the stairs. Everyone exclaimed that this wasn't acceptable and urged him to use the Atelier Meister's room, but Kurt declined. Eurytia assured him it would be fine since the Atelier Meister was too busy to come, and it would be a shame to let it go unused. Danzo suggested they all stay close in case anything happened. The whole team spent 2 hours convincing Kurt, and he finally agreed, though he felt pressured and insisted he would move out once the Atelier Meister arrived. Next, they needed to move their things from the inn to the mansion. Eurytia asked Kurt to handle her belongings, since she had to go meet the neighbors and the military personnel managing the frontier city. She also asked for another favor, setting up a barrier around the mansion to repel curses. Kurt apologized, explaining that it would be too difficult to set up such a barrier, and Eurytia accepted this, asking again about his belongings. With no other option, she decided to use the anti-curse talismans she'd received from Mimiko instead. Meanwhile, a familiar man was pleased to see the walls finally completed. A man named Generic addressed him as General, and expressed disappointment that he wouldn't be seeing General Aru Ardun anymore. Aru thanked Generic for stepping in as a substitute general, and Generic was relieved to pass the responsibility back. He then asked why the north and west walls were perfectly straight, while the south and east walls looked normal. Aru thought of a particular boy and asked Generic if he'd believe those walls were built in just 3 days. Generic doubted it, but assumed Aru and his men must have focused especially on the north and west sides because of the demon attacks. Aru thought about that too. He had personally come to the frontier town to look out for potential spies among the contract workers, but had instead found Kurt, someone he could hire as their own spy. Aru believed Kurt's talent shouldn't be hidden away in a small, nameless frontier town. Just then, a soldier reported that Eurytia had arrived, representing the new atelier in town. Aru was surprised to hear that an ex-royal adventurer was now working for an atelier, and Generic found it hard to believe that an atelier was setting up shop in a frontier town. Eurytia appeared and greeted Aru, though Generic quickly tried to charm her. Aru instructed him to stop or face serious consequences. Eurytia explained she came by to greet them now that the atelier had settled in. When Aru asked if the princess and the Atelier Meister were present, Eurytia said they were overseas. She lied even though Aru was trustworthy, because there might be enemies nearby. Aru and Eurytia then wished each other luck as they prepared to work together to develop the frontier city. Meanwhile, a sinister bishop watched with a smirk as a woman cast an ominous spell back in the church. In another part of the frontier city, a woman with a familiar set of melons rode in a carriage. Mimiko advised Ophelia to stay calm and informed her they would reach their hideout soon. The curse sorcerer and the mastermind behind Lisa's assassination would soon face Ophelia's wrath. That night, Eurytia walked back to the atelier. A girl approached her, handing over a paper she claimed Eurytia had dropped. Eurytia didn't recognize it as hers, and before she could ask, the girl disappeared. Inspecting the paper, Eurytia realized it was a map from Mimiko suggesting she visit a hideout. Still, she chose to leave it for tomorrow. Returning to the inn, she found Danzo sitting outside the room Kurt had set up for the princess. He reported that Lisa insisted on using the room, so Eurytia couldn't intervene for now. She asked Danzo to rest, telling him she'd take over. Inside the room, Eurytia admired its elegance, and Lisa couldn't hide her own admiration either. Eurytia reminded her to use the center bedroom, but Lisa resisted, unwilling to give up the room Kurt had specially prepared for her. Eurytia found her insistence endearing and suggested she sleep in the middle of the bed rather than a corner. Lisa declined, explaining she was leaving space just in case Kurt visited her that night. Irritated, Eurytia lay down on the vacant space meant for him, expressing how tired she was. Lisa patted her head, complimenting her hard work. Eurytia mentioned that Danzo had been guarding outside earlier despite his claim that he wouldn't serve a princess. Lisa, feeling apologetic, wanted to make up for the trouble. Eurytia assured her not to worry, they'd keep her safe, but advised staying cautious. She then pasted a talisman on the wall, one of the anti-curse talismans she'd received from Mimiko. They were written in a magic ink that wouldn't fade or wash away. Eurytia planned to put them around the mansion before resting on the sofa in the next room. Remembering something, Lisa showed her a small room for an attendant next to the princess's quarters. Impressed by Kurt's thoughtfulness, Eurytia decided to use it. Meanwhile, in a darkened room, a cloaked figure angrily discussed the timing of casting another curse on the princess. Another voice blamed the first for the previous failure, but mentioned that the bishop had a backup plan. They exchanged a few more words before deciding to wait for updates. Nearby, a woman lay on a bed with a strange tool resembling an IV transfusion slowly dripping something into her bloodstream. The next morning, Eurytia grunted as she rolled over in bed. She caught a familiar, delicious scent. It was Kurt's honey toasts. Realizing she'd slept longer than usual because of the soft bed, she got up, scolding herself for being so careless. She noticed Lisa was missing from her bed, so she rushed out of the room and found Kurt. He greeted her warmly and presented breakfast for the day. Eurytia was surprised but wanted to know where Lisa had gone. Just then, Lisa appeared wearing what looked like a naked apron-style outfit, asking Kurt where to put the next dish. Shocked by the sight, Eurytia angrily asked what Lisa was wearing. She quickly covered Kurt's eyes and demanded why he seemed so calm. Kurt replied that it had been surprising at first, but it now looked like a casual outfit to him. Eurytia asked just how poor Kurt's sense of common decency was. Lisa then clarified that Eurytia was misunderstanding something. The princess was actually wearing shorts and a cropped top under the apron. Eurytia complained about how misleading Lisa's outfit was. Just then, Danzo, Cons, and Sheena entered the dining room. They paused briefly, then turned and left, closing the door behind them. Lisa clung to Sheena, exclaiming that they practically wore the same thing. Sheena disagreed. Meanwhile, outside, Danzo and Cons wondered if they'd be executed on the first day of their job. Lisa turned sulky during mealtime after Eurytia scolded her. Everyone else enjoyed the meal that Kurt had prepared early that morning. They assumed Kurt must have woken up early and spent a lot of time on the food before them. However, Eurytia knew it had only taken him a short while. Kurt then asked everyone to enjoy their meal as he went off to clean something. Eurytia told him to clean up after eating, but Kurt insisted on removing some graffiti he'd noticed on the walls and promised to be quick. Eurytia allowed him to go, returning to enjoy her meal while wondering how long their peaceful days would last. Moments after Kurt left, Eurytia realized something was off. She went around the mansion and noticed a few something were missing. Then she found Kurt near a door, busy erasing the anti-curse talisman she had pasted on the walls. Eurytia was speechless and dropped to the floor in defeat. Something so important was being wiped away like random graffiti on a wall. Confused, Kurt asked who had drawn the graffiti, especially the many markings he discovered in Lisa's room. Resigned, Eurytia told him there was a graffiti monster in town who sometimes drew in random places. Shocked, Kurt was genuinely worried about this mysterious monster. Eurytia reassured him that the Sakura party would make sure the premises were secure, and Kurt felt relieved to hear that. Eurytia visited Mimiko and asked if the anti-curse talisman would really stay intact. Mimiko confidently confirmed it would. Then, Eurytia pulled out some bread Kurt had made for her lunch. Mimiko and Ophelia were instantly drawn to its delicious smell. Eurytia asked what they should do, and Mimiko replied that Kurt would probably just erase the talismans again. Eurytia suggested they visit the atelier to take action. but Mimiko warned that they risked exposure by doing so. Just then, teacups filled with tea appeared on the table. Eurytia requested that Mimiko at least make the phantoms visible when serving tea. Mimiko explained she hadn't told them to act invisible but promised to make them guard the atelier's surroundings. However, until they identified the enemy, the phantoms couldn't move freely. Although they still hadn't figured out who the enemy was, they needed to act before the enemy did. Ophelia proposed luring the enemy out, adding that as long as Kurt stayed close to Lisa when she was cursed, he could cure her with some porridge. Mimiko, though surprised that Kurt had easily dispelled her anti-curse talismans, agreed with Ophelia's plan and began to think of other solutions. Knowing Kurt could lift curses with porridge, Eurytia wasn't shocked that he could erase talismans as if they were just graffiti. She suspected he might have done even more incredible things without her knowing. Mimiko then ended the meeting, promising to update them on their plan, and requesting that Eurytia and the Sakura party help guard the mansion. Eurytia asked if they could trust Generic, and Mimiko agreed to investigate. Suddenly, Ophelia made a strange sound, causing Mimiko and Eurytia to look over. Ophelia then declared that the bread had vanished. The room fell silent at her absurd claim. Ophelia exclaimed that she wasn't too late to bring Kurt to her atelier, to which Mimiko angrily responded, saying she had already missed her chance to act. 2 weeks had passed since Kurt removed the anti-curse talismans, and nothing happened to Lisa. It seemed the assassins had given up on targeting her. Meanwhile, the members of the Sakura party had leveled up in their respective skills after working at the atelier. Eurytia hadn't noticed her own rank had risen, but her slashes had become sharper. She wondered if Kurt was the reason for these improvements. While bottling peaches, Lisa was startled by a bird. Kurt checked on her and the princess asked what to do next. Kurt mentioned cleaning the bathroom and Lisa offered to help. Then he suggested they go shopping in town since she hadn't left the atelier since arriving. However, Lisa looked worried. Kurt noticed her expression and thought she might be afraid to go outside, recalling how the graffiti demon had targeted her. Lisa said it wasn't the right time and asked Kurt to take her shopping when it felt safer. Kurt promised he would. Meanwhile, Eurytia was storing a cart full of precious ores. 3 weeks had passed without any sign of Lisa's attackers. She wondered if they had given up or were still plotting something. Just then, Kurt appeared and invited her for tea. Eurytia stopped worrying as she admired the food Kurt had prepared. Lisa enjoyed it too, and jokingly asked him to make more if she ever got cursed again. Kurt casually assured her that there was no need to worry about future curses, leaving both girls confused. Meanwhile, Marlefis was being scolded for wasting enough of their resources. They called her useless, but still planned to use her for one final curse attack on the princess. Even if something had protected Lisa from the last curse, they believed they would succeed if they added Marlefis's power to it. With the little energy she had left, Marlefis crawled forward, only for the sorcerer to grab her face. He was fed up and demanded she give him every last bit of magic power she had. Back at the tea session, Eurytia asked Kurt what he meant. Kurt casually explained that he had set up a barrier around the workshop. Eurytia was shocked, remembering how he had once said it would be difficult to create an anti-curse barrier. Kurt replied that he'd never said that at all, leaving everyone confused. Eurytia asked again why Kurt thought Lisa wouldn't be cursed again. Kurt explained that he had put up a barrier that could reverse curses, not just block them. He said it would reflect any curse cast toward them, though he admitted he modified it a bit since he felt sorry for whoever was casting the curse. The sorcerer cast a curse on Lisa, but it rebounded. Ophelia sensed the curse's effect and quickly informed Mimiko about it. The sorcerer then began screaming as his face lit up like a bulb, and soon his entire body glowed as well. Horrified, Marlefis crawled away. The sorcerer, noticing her attempt to escape, grabbed her. His face started to bloat and Marlefis cried out in disgust. The man died and a high-ranking demon appeared in front of her. The demon saw Marlefis as useful and flew off with her toward the old ruins in the west, claiming it was the best place to prepare for killing the princess. Marlefis questioned why a demon would want to kill a human princess. The demon explained he had been summoned by Triton, the bishop, whom he mockingly called the sparkly fat one. Marlefis was shocked to learn that high-ranking church officials had contracted with demons. The demon then handed her what was once her useless staff, now filled up with magical power. When Marlefis asked what she should do, the demon ordered her to heal herself. She felt her power draining and suddenly skeletons began to rise from the ground around her. Confused and terrified, she wondered what was happening. The demon warned her to heal herself, or she would die. Soon after, the generals noticed the fog around the frontier city thickening. They could no longer see the patrolling soldiers and suddenly heard the sounds of swords clashing. They immediately checked the area where the sounds were coming from. As part of the fog thinned, they discovered skeletons. Everyone used magic to light up the area, and when they saw a horde of skeletons surrounding the city walls, Aru ordered the alarms to be rung. Meanwhile, Eurytia looked shocked when she saw a sorcerer with a bloated face. She asked who it was, and Mimiko identified him as the sorcerer who had been after Lise. He was a wanted man, an S-rank magician skilled in both magic and assassination. Eurytia then asked why he was glowing, and Mimiko explained it was due to Kurt's rebound spell. His swollen face, however, was a result of poison. Someone must have stabbed him with it. Mimiko speculated that whoever poisoned him might have considered him useless once he started glowing. Ophelia added that the poison's ingredients were common, which would make it difficult to trace the real culprit. She was, however, more impressed that the rebound spell was still active even after the sorcerer's death, and she suggested consulting Kurt to help solve the case. Eurytia refused, asking them not to involve Kurt further. She didn't want him to learn about these dark matters. Ophelia understood, knowing that Lisa would agree, and she herself didn't want Kurt drawn into the darker side of things either. Mimiko then took over the conversation, asking Eurytia to ensure Lisa stayed in the atelier. Suddenly, the sound of alarm bells startled them. A phantom member reported to Mimiko, informing her that thousands of skeletons were approaching from the west. Back at the city walls, Aru decided to lead the first squad to defend their side, while Generic took the other squads to evacuate the citizens to safety. Generic said he'd stay behind, assuming the skeletons would only approach from one direction. But Aru warned him that another enemy might attack from a different side and urged him to focus on protecting the citizens. Aru's worries, however, turned out to be unnecessary. One of the soldiers pointed down from the walls, and Aru saw the skeletons disappearing as they got close to the city walls. Everyone was baffled by what was happening. Generic asked if Aru had used purification magic on the walls during the repairs. Aru denied it, but suddenly remembered Kurt. Realizing what might have happened, he couldn't help but shout in frustration, picturing Kurt blushing and calling his name. Meanwhile, the girls were in a panic over what was happening. Eurytia tried to leave to secure the atelier, but a phantom member suddenly appeared and whispered a report to Mimiko. Breaking into a cold sweat, Mimiko informed the others that 2,000 skeletons had already been wiped out. Both Ophelia and Eurytia were stunned. Eurytia couldn't believe the skeletons had vanished so quickly just after reports of their attack. Then a part of the ceiling opened up. Eurytia suggested to the phantoms that they should just use the door and talk normally, to which Mimiko responded that she hadn't taught her people to act like that. The next morning, Generic sent out carrier pigeons to spread information, but it seemed that someone was shooting them down along the way. Right after the skeletons disappeared, other undead creatures and demons appeared. However, they hadn't realized that only the west wall had purification magic on it, while the east and south walls were just regular walls. Generic ordered his men to take down any flying enemies while he went to report to General Aru. Generic soon told Aru that the city was surrounded by enemies on all sides. The two concluded that the west ruins, where the skeletons had come from, might be the source of the enemies, and someone could be controlling them. With the monsters and demons flooding in, they realized it was too late to act. Generic admired how the city's walls were like those of the Holy City, and asked Aru where the magic had come from. But even Aru didn't know if the walls were truly purified or not. Meanwhile, the one responsible for his headache was casually doing house chores. Shortly after, Kurt asked Eurytia what was happening. She told him and Lisa to stay inside because undead and demons were gathering outside the city walls. As for the members of the Skara party, they might not be able to return anytime soon. When Lisa suggested calling for reinforcements, Eurytia explained that the demons were blocking the roads. However, Eurytia doubted any reinforcements would come and concluded that they should handle it themselves. Kurt offered to help, but Eurytia asked him to stay put. Lisa then asked if it was true that 2,000 skeletons had vanished after touching the city walls. Eurytia confirmed it only happened on the north and west walls, where the walls seemed to have purification magic. Hearing this, Kurt shared that it was the same in his hometown, which he described as an ordinary village. Eurytia remembered that Kurt had been the one to repair the north and west walls. Lisa suggested building something that could eliminate the undead in one hit, but Kurt said it would be impossible without the Atelier Meister. Eurytia couldn't help but feel guilty. She then remembered that attacks with light attributes should work well and asked Kurt for his help. She said she would leave first but instructed him to find a box with a pattern in her storage and take it to General Aru, giving him a map as a guide. Shyly, she asked Kurt not to look inside the box or around her messy storage. With a serious face, Kurt promised to search for the box with his eyes closed. Eurytia felt bad for him. She then asked Lise to stay in the atelier where the phantoms would protect it, while she went to join Ophelia and Mimiko to fight off the enemies. Lisa suddenly felt sad and asked them to protect the city at all costs. Eurytia vowed to do so. Meanwhile, General Aru had just finished forming an elite group of soldiers and ordered everyone to move quickly during the day. The soldiers were full of energy until someone reported Eurytia's arrival. Generic then gave Aru a subtle hint, and Aru agreed to get Eurytia's help. Eurytia entered the barracks shortly afterward, bringing Ophelia and Mimiko with her. She casually introduced them to the soldiers, and the two generals immediately understood the situation. Eurytia confirmed that the third princess had been in the frontier town all along, and the enemy forces were targeting her. Concerned for Lisa's safety, Aru offered to provide escort knights, but Mimiko assured him it wasn't necessary, as she had her phantoms. Aru agreed that this would be a better approach, though he realized he needed to adjust their strategy now that the princess was in the city. Eurytia then instructed Aru to act as a decoy to protect the city. Although reluctant, Aru couldn't disagree, knowing Eurytia's plan could allow her to slip through enemy lines. However, Eurytia didn't plan to call for reinforcements. Instead, she wanted to head toward the western ruins where the demons were gathering. She suggested using the knights as a diversion to draw the demons' attention. Aru disagreed, worried this approach would be too risky for Eurytia to handle alone. Ophelia reassured him, explaining that they had a plan and a new secret weapon. Mimiko reminded Aru that they were committed to protecting the princess at all costs. With little choice, Aru reluctantly agreed, but he requested one condition. He wanted to go to the ruins himself. Eurytia questioned if a general should leave his post, but Aru replied that he would place the soldiers under Generic's command and asked Mimiko and Ophelia to protect the city in his absence. Mimiko assured him they would handle the city's defense. Generic tried to object, but Aru reminded him that he should have already died if not for a miracle. Eurytia asked what he meant by that, and Aru explained how the invading skeletons had vanished upon touching the city walls, leaving only their weapons outside. He suspected the walls had somehow purified even the undead and demons. He recalled a boy who had repaired the walls in just 3 days and assumed it was his doing. The girls already knew who this boy was. Just then Kurt came over to deliver something, and his eyes met Aru's. Kurt was puzzled to see Aru, the supervisor, wearing heavy armor, especially with Mimiko and Ophelia also present. Aru was surprised to see Kurt and found out he was working at the new atelier with Eurytia. Kurt explained he was only handling chores. Aru couldn't believe that a boy who could create walls with purification magic was just doing chores. He then thought about the secret weapon and hoped the new atelier could create weapons for the battlefield. Kurt asked why Mimiko and Ophelia were there, and they both said they came to help. Ophelia took this opportunity to apologize for disappearing on him, but Kurt didn't mind, understanding it was an emergency. He also thanked her for recommending him to the atelier and promised to keep his knowledge of Lisa a secret. In return, Ophelia asked Kurt to look after Lisa for her. Eurytia, now curious, wondered what had happened between Kurt and Lisa. She then reminded Kurt they had to clean up the west ruins. Kurt offered to help, but Eurytia pointed out that Lisa was left alone and told him not to worry. With that, Kurt left. Seeing Kurt off, Aru worried that Kurt might have misunderstood something. Eurytia pointed out that Kurt was still young, and she didn't want him to feel burdened. She then revealed that the box Kurt had brought was their secret weapon. Aru ordered his men to prepare whatever Eurytia needed. Meanwhile, Generic looked passive, prompting Aru to ask why he seemed unhappy, adding that he wouldn't change his orders. Gritting his teeth, Generic walked over to the cabinets, opened a bottle of brandy, poured 2 glasses, and handed one to Aru. Aru reminded him that this wasn't just a fragrant drink, and Generic agreed, recalling that they were supposed to break the glass afterward. But instead, Generic poured his brandy onto the ground, declaring that this wasn't their farewell toast since there would be no farewell at all. He urged Aru to return alive at all costs, saying that once everything was over, they'd enjoy the brandy together. Aru promised to do just that. The inner gates were soon opened for Aru and Eurytia. In that moment, the undead outside rushed toward them. However, the iron gate remained shut. They noticed the undead had realized the gates hadn't been purified. Eurytia then pulled a secret weapon from her bag, a magic crystal. She explained it was a light crystal with purification powers. Generic, Mimiko, and the other soldiers were also ready. Eurytia asked Aru if he was prepared, as it would be blindingly bright. After confirming the horses, sensitive to intense light, had been moved to safety, Eurytia smashed the magic crystal in front of the gate. Everyone was momentarily blinded by the flash, and when they uncovered their eyes, the undead army had disappeared. Aru couldn't help but curse in disbelief, and even Generic, Mimiko, and the other soldiers were left speechless. Aru noticed Eurytia's surprise. Even though she was the one who had used it, Eurytia admitted it was her first time using such a crystal. Kurt always managed to surprise her. With that, Aru and Eurytia charged out of the city walls. Generic and his team moved out to distract the remaining enemies, while Mimiko took over and commanded the rest of the soldiers. They would handle the undead and demons, hoping the two would succeed in their mission. Meanwhile, Kurt felt downcast, thinking about how helpless he'd been during critical moments. He wished he had the strength to help others. Lost in thought, he found himself distracted from his chores and decided to take some time for reflection. He headed to the smithy, recalling how Danzo wielded a katana and decided to create a smaller version. His uncle had once told him that striking iron with his whole heart could help him discover new things within himself. But despite the encouragement, he still felt discouraged. Every job he took seemed to end in failure, especially since he wasn't skilled in combat. Now he had friends and comrades and was working in an atelier. He needed to be careful not to lose this position too. Kurt thought about Lisa and hoped she was doing well, as well as his former party members. He hoped they were eating well. Just then, Lisa heard noises coming from the smithy. It didn't take Kurt long to finish crafting the smaller katana, though he immediately considered it a failure. It looked like a C or D ranked weapon, even though he'd aimed for B rank. Lisa called out to him, and Kurt warned her to stay inside since it could be dangerous. She noticed the weapon he'd just created, and when she asked to take a closer look, Kurt let her. She quickly recognized it as a magic sword. Kurt explained that he'd accidentally infused it with magic during forging, and that it would activate if unsheathed and swung overhead. Lisa found the failed sword both splendid and beautiful, which took Kurt by surprise. He offered it to her, saying it could at least cut a tree branch, and Lisa thanked him sincerely. Her gratitude left Kurt speechless. He could see that Lisa was afraid but still smiling, and he wondered if it would be all right to play along. Worry gnawed at him, fearing she might distance herself from him. Finally, he worked up the courage to ask her directly if someone was targeting her. Lisa's expression changed, realizing Kurt had finally caught on. She apologized for causing him trouble, but he assured her he didn't mind, knowing that Eurytia would feel the same. Lisa revealed that Eurytia was risking her life in the western ruins for her. Misunderstanding, Kurt assumed Eurytia was still pursuing the graffiti demon from earlier. He believed that the person targeting Lisa was hiding in those ruins, recalling how Golnova once wanted to deface ruins before Marlefis stopped him. Convinced Eurytia had gone alone to deal with the graffiti demon, Kurt felt frustrated by his inability to protect Lisa, someone so important to him. His words touched Lisa deeply, although she still felt like she was competing for his regard. Lisa confessed that she wanted to catch the culprit with her own hands too. Kurt could tell she felt weak, but he was still troubled by his own feelings of inadequacy. She explained that the entire city was surrounded by demons, so he couldn't leave to help Eurytia. Then Kurt had an idea. There might be another way. He invited Lise to join him in cleaning up the western ruins. Meanwhile, Eurytia suddenly shivered, prompting Aru to ask what was wrong. She said she felt a chill down her spine and wondered if someone was talking about her. Aru corrected her, noting that such a feeling would usually mean someone sneezed. Eurytia then shrugged it off, assuming something was about to happen soon. It didn't take long for Lisa to get ready to go out, and of course she didn't forget to bring along the small katana Kurt had just made for her. She remembered his instructions on activating its magic and tried it, but nothing happened. Suddenly she noticed someone approaching and Lisa quickly turned to face them. Meanwhile, Eurytia spotted a flash of light from the direction of the city wall and assumed it was Generic and the others. She and Aru arrived in the ruins, where they were greeted by a swarm of demons. They were starting to run low on magic crystals, and the trees and rubble made it difficult to find the source of the disturbance. Suddenly, a wraith launched a surprise attack on Aru, but he managed to fight back. Eurytia tried to move to his side, but Aru urged her not to. As she attempted to reach her magic crystals, demons grabbed her arms, holding her in place. Just then, Khans appeared and slashed through the demons, surprising Eurytia. Danzo also cut down the demons surrounding Aru. When Aru asked who they were, Danzo explained that they worked for the Atelier. Shna came running up, announcing that she had found the source of the demons. Eurytia then grabbed a magic crystal and shattered it on the ground, instantly destroying all the nearby demons. The members of the Sakura party were shocked by the magic crystal's power, even though they had expected to be surprised. Afterward, Eurytia pulled out a vial and shared one with Aru, who initially thought it was a healing potion. Eurytia explained it was just a medicinal herb juice, though its effects were potent enough to make Aru react with surprise. Eurytia led the way to the ruins, remembering they had been built for reasons still unknown. As soon as they entered, demons attacked and the Sakura party covered their rear. Eurytia and Aru hurried through the ruins until they reached the innermost chamber, where they discovered a dark, murky pool spawning undead creatures and demons. Without holding back, Eurytia threw a magic crystal at the pool, wondering if that would do the trick. The pool disappeared, but a high-ranking demon appeared in its place. Realizing it was the boss, Eurytia struck first with the power of the magic crystal. However, the demon survived due to his seemingly endless lives. Aru attacked next, but the demon didn't even flinch, allowing the sword strike to hit. The wound immediately healed as if it had never been there. Meanwhile, a thin shadow stretched from the demon toward an inner chamber where Marlefis screamed in pain, though Eurytia was unaware of this and grew increasingly annoyed by the demon's resilience. The demon, observing them calmly, praised their efforts. He then opened a portal, revealing Generic and the soldiers fighting desperately to protect the princess. Aru declared that they would not yield to the demons and that he would personally defeat the High Demon. The High Demon apologized mockingly for the number of minions he had sent and summoned even more. He remarked that they weren't calling for reinforcements and pointed out that only one part of the city walls had purification. He also expressed his intention to crush the 3 people defending the entrance. Enraged, Eurytia attacked the demon alongside Aru. Together, they pierced the demon's heart and severed his neck. But the demon merely laughed, reattaching his head as if nothing had happened, and declared he would drag the princess out of the city and tear her to pieces. Eurytia felt trapped in a stalemate, unsure how to handle a demon that could regenerate so easily. She could only defend herself from the demon's attacks, noticing that he was purposely avoiding her vital points, as if he were playing with her. Meanwhile, newly spawned demons and undead broke through their defenses. Aru suggested they finish off the high demon to end things quickly, but Eurytia questioned how they could defeat him. The demon, enjoying her look of despair, mocked her to surrender. Eurytia, however, exclaimed that she wouldn't back down. Meanwhile, a severely injured Marlefis knew her fate was sealed. Even if she managed to escape, she would eventually be caught. If all her magical power was drained, the high demon would devour her soul to grow stronger. She no longer cared, having lost everything already. Her loyalty to the church, her dedication to the princess, even her sense of self. Just then, part of the nearby floor crumbled and she heard voices from below. Listening closely, she recognized one as Kurt's, speaking with a woman. Kurt then casually popped his head out from the hole to survey the area, and was surprised to see someone he knew. He asked why she was there, and Marlefis wondered the same. Lys soon appeared, further shocking Marlefis upon seeing the 3rd princess. Marlefis assumed they already knew of her involvement and had sent Kurt to try to convince her. She found it amusing that they would use an ex-comrade to appeal to her. Kurt asked if Marlefis had been after Lys. Marlefis realized that Kurt didn't know the full story, figuring that they had withheld information from the blockhead, something she thought was wise considering how useless he seemed to her wherever he went. Lisa asked Kurt if he knew Marlefis, and he confirmed that she was a nun, and part of the group he was grateful for. Marlefis corrected him, saying she had already been excommunicated from the church. When she started to explain that the bishop was actually the mastermind, Kurt interrupted, asking if she'd painted a giant graffiti in the ruins as revenge for being kicked out. Lisa understood what Marlefis meant, but Kurt was still confused. She urged him to calm down. Kurt then asked Marlefis if she'd seen Eurytia, and the ex-nun confirmed that Eurytia was fighting a high demon. Marlefis gave Kurt directions on where to find her. Kurt tried to go alone, but Lisa insisted on going to meet Eurytia herself, asking Kurt to clean up the graffiti on the floor. Kurt hesitated, concerned, but Lisa reassured him, reminding him she had the magic sword he'd recently made. She also hinted that Marlefis looked hungry and was likely in pain. Kurt reluctantly agreed and asked if Marlefis was all right. Marlefis could only see 2 fools standing before her and couldn't believe they'd left the princess, a target, on her own. Kurt told Lisa to be careful, then quickly prepared a cleaning solution. Marlefis called him a fool, but surprisingly, the magic circle wiped away in a single swipe of the mop. The high demon noticed his spell had vanished and tried to retreat, but Aru and Eurytia seized the chance to strike. For the first time, the demon dodged an attack which both swordsmen quickly noticed. The high demon wondered what was going on, and Eurytia realized that his wounds weren't healing. Although unsure of the cause, she pulled out a magic crystal, but the demon quickly swatted her bag of crystals away, declaring that playtime was over. Suddenly, Lisa appeared, calling out to Eurytia. The demon's attention shifted to her, and Eurytia froze, anxiously wondering why Lisa had come. Seeing the princess, the demon aimed a deadly attack at her. Eurytia and Aru tried to shield Lisa, but they were too late. The demon's strike pierced Lisa's chest, sending her to the ground. The demon laughed with satisfaction, mocking Lisa for not hiding in the city. To everyone's surprise, Lisa responded calmly, asking who the real fool was and smiling at them. The injured Lisa was only an illusion. The demon, convinced he'd felt the warmth and scent of a real body, was shocked. Lisa then explained that her magic sword of illusions, Butterfly, was crafted by the new Atelier Meister, claiming no one could see through its tricks. Eurytia wondered if Kurt had truly created this remarkable weapon. Frustrated, the demon struck at Lisa again, but it was just another illusion. Lisa reappeared from a corner and picked up a magic crystal. She then struck the crystal's hilt with her sword, and although the demon tried to stop her, Aru and Eurytia blocked his way. The crystal cracked, filling the area with a brilliant light. The demon screamed in pain as he disintegrated. Nearby, Kurt heard the scream and wondered what had happened. Marlefis assumed the high demon had been defeated. Meanwhile, the demons outside also vanished. Danzo and Khans, who had been swinging their swords, stumbled when they hit nothing, falling awkwardly. Sheena, Generic, and the soldiers in the city were surprised to see the demons gone. Ophelia declared the mission a success, and Mimiko praised Eurytia for her efforts. Instead of celebrating their victory, Eurytia scolded Lisa for leaving the atelier. Lisa explained she felt the need to help. Eurytia had genuinely thought Lisa was dead earlier. Lisa apologized, but Eurytia told her not to, since she had saved them. Aru couldn't help but agree and knelt before the princess, asking how he could repay her for saving his life. Lisa asked him not to bow, as she felt she was the one who should be grateful. She offered him a government position in the capital as a reward, but Aru refused, saying he preferred life in the frontier city. Instead, he requested some wine to share with his people, and Lisa agreed to provide it. Eurytia then slumped to the ground, asking them to stop with the formalities. Lisa asked about their conditions, and Eurytia, despite having a feeling about it, asked how Lisa had managed to enter the ruins. Lisa explained that the Atelier Meister had dug an underground path to avoid the demons above. Just then, a phantom appeared, bringing a message from Mimiko, who reported that the demons on the surface were no longer present. Eurytia felt relieved. Lisa then ordered Aru to return to the city and report back. Aru asked to accompany them, but Lisa insisted it would cause problems if people knew she had been in the ruins. She planned to return to the city through the underground passage. Eurytia also asked Aru to look after the members of the Sakura party. Noticing Aru was missing, Eurytia asked where Kurt was. She shared that the demon kept regenerating and wanted to know what had just happened. Lisa casually explained that Kurt had erased the magic circle the demon had created. Eurytia had completely forgotten that erasing magic circles was one of Kurt's specialties. Lisa then mentioned that the bishop was the mastermind, according to information from a captured nun. When Eurytia asked who the nun was, Lisa revealed it was someone Kurt knew named Marlefis. Eurytia froze at the familiar name, quickly remembering Marlefis as Kurt's former teammate. She asked where Kurt was and rushed off to find him. Meanwhile, Marlefis was examining the mop and water Kurt had used to erase the magic circle. Kurt even shared some rice balls with her. Though Marlefis knew she couldn't digest food due to a curse, she wondered if her last meal would be Kurt's cooking, and was surprised to find it delicious after taking a bite. She imagined how carefully Kurt had prepared everything, from the ingredients to the cooking method. Realizing she was actually enjoying the food, she noticed she didn't feel nauseous anymore. She then removed her clothing to check her stomach and found that the curse was gone. Kurt quickly covered his eyes and told her to undress somewhere else. Marlefis finally understood the extent of Kurt's help to the team all along. Feeling remorseful, she began to cry, but Kurt reassured her, promising to bake her favorite grape bread. She couldn't believe how much they had taken Kurt's kindness for granted, and hoped they could become a team again once they returned to the city. Just then, Eurytia and Lisa came running in, and two phantoms appeared out of nowhere. Marlefis froze, recognizing them. Lisa told Kurt that these were soldiers sent by Mimiko to capture the graffiti demon, and Kurt believed her, but Marlefis was in disbelief. The phantoms seized Marlefis, assuming she would soon be gone. As Kurt called out to her, Marlefis asked him to save her. Kurt promised to visit her with some grape bread, and Marlefis, exasperated, shouted that wasn't what she meant and called him an idiot. Seeing Marlefis off, Kurt hoped she would atone for her sins in jail. Lisa thought Marlefis might face the death penalty, but Kurt believed she had already reflected on her actions and shown remorse. He then noticed Eurytia was covered in blood and tried to tend to her wounds. Seeing his concern, Eurytia felt her heart skip a beat for a moment. She told him not to worry since she had already taken his medicine. Then she started scolding Kurt, reminding him to stay close to Lisa. When Kurt and Lisa were side by side, Eurytia couldn't deny that the two were inseparable. She found it hard to believe the skinny boy she once knew had become an Atelier Meister. With a troublesome princess and herself as the chief adventurer of the Atelier, she figured things would be difficult. Since they had already cleaned up the graffiti and captured the culprit, Eurytia suggested they head back to the Atelier. She and Lisa then linked arms with Kurt. He felt grateful to be part of the team. However, he worried there might still be monsters outside. Eurytia reassured him, saying the Atelier Meister had already dealt with them. Kurt was surprised, assuming the Atelier Meister must be really impressive. Lisa noticed something and asked him what was wrong. Eurytia assumed Kurt was smirking because he had two beautiful women by his side. Kurt denied it, but agreed that both were indeed beautiful. He admitted he didn't fully understand himself, but he just felt truly happy. He was glad to have a place to return to and comrades to go back with. From the bottom of his heart, he felt a deep sense of joy. That night, everyone celebrated their victory with good food and drinks. Kurt was speechless as he watched them devour his cooking. He had expected a lively, noisy celebration, but instead, everyone ate as if the food was liquid. Concerned that the dishes might not be suitable for a celebration, he asked if he should prepare something better. Aru insisted that Kurt was mistaken. They were just too focused on how delicious the food and drinks were. When Aru asked everyone to confirm this, no one backed him up, which made him frustrated. Then they all started praising Kurt's cooking. Kurt thanked Aru for helping to make the atmosphere livelier. Kurt turned to Danzo and asked if the food was really okay since he hadn't actually learned to cook. Danzo reassured him, saying it was so good that any future wife of Kurt's wouldn't need to worry about cooking. For some reason, Eurytia felt a bit offended by this comment. Lisa mentioned they'd soon gather books and tools needed for the Atelier Meister, suggesting that Kurt could get some cookbooks too. Kurt was happy to hear that he'd be able to read them. He poured more drinks for Aru, still thinking of him as a construction supervisor. He also wrapped up some food for the soldiers who couldn't join the celebration due to guard and cleanup duties. As Kurt continued serving others, Aru called out, telling him to join in since the Atelier's work had saved everyone. Watching the celebration, Kurt realized just how remarkable the Atelier Meister and the tools really were. Lisa and Eurytia then asked why he was acting like he wasn't part of the group. Kurt explained that he often felt like he was missing something, admitting that he struggled to read the mood and be aware of his surroundings. His words caught Aru's attention, who asked if Kurt knew who he really was. Kurt replied that he only knew him as the supervisor at the wall repair site. Aru laughed and agreed with a grin. Then Lisa explained that Aru was actually the leader of the Knights Order and the general in charge of the frontier city. Kurt apologized, but Aru just chuckled, agreeing he could still be the worksite supervisor. Lisa then asked if Kurt could guess what she was thinking, and Eurytia added that everyone there probably felt the same way. Kurt guessed random things about the food and his uselessness, but none of them were right. Eventually he realized they all saw him as someone rather dull. Everyone laughed and agreed, though Kurt apologized for his dullness. Eurytia reassured him, asking him to stay just as he was. Seeing everyone have fun, Kurt felt happy and decided to make the evening even more exciting. He walked off for a moment, lit something up, and hoped they would enjoy it. Suddenly, something shot into the sky and exploded like a flower of fire. Citizens nearby panicked, thinking the city was under attack by demons again. But some quickly realized it was just fireworks. Everyone watched in awe, knowing this was a site usually reserved for the royal capital. They saw that it was coming from the Atelier's direction. Kurt was quietly watching the fireworks when Aru, Eurytia, and the other soldiers approached him, surprised by the sudden explosions. They asked if he was all right and what had caused the blasts. Kurt casually replied that he had just set off fireworks. Aru and the others, unfamiliar with fireworks, asked what they were. Kurt explained they were used for celebrations. Aru, still puzzled, turned to his men who were fussing about something. To their surprise, everyone realized their wounds had healed. Kurt brushed it off, saying it was normal to feel better after a meal, leaving Aru and the soldiers speechless before they finally exclaimed that such healing was far from normal. Elsewhere, in complete darkness, Marlefis was starting to lose her sanity, unsure of where she was and bound tightly. Suddenly, a door opened and Mimiko stepped into the dark room. Marlefis pleaded for help, but Mimiko ignored her, introducing herself instead and informing Marlefis that she had been sentenced to death. Marlefis, desperate, begged for mercy and promised to confess everything. She blurted out every secret without holding back, which startled Mimiko, who sarcastically commented that Marlefis could have shown more dignity. Mimiko then closed the door, leaving Marlefis to scream in the darkness. Moments later, Mimiko opened the door slightly, glaring at her. She asked if Marlefis would truly do anything she was told, and Marlefis swore she would. Still doubtful, Mimiko closed the door again, instructing the phantoms to keep Marlefis alive while maintaining her sanity. She then called on the military police to gather, as she had decided to visit Tristan. Soon after, Mimiko told Ophelia that they had been too late when they arrived at the cathedral. Ophelia assumed Tristan had died after offering his soul to the High Demon. But Mimiko explained that Tristan was already dead, and it was actually a nun and Marquis Gastel's niece who had given up their souls. She called Tristan a heretic for using others' souls in that way. Ophelia realized that Tristan had become a scapegoat. Even if the royal family tried to blame the church, only Tristan would be held responsible, and it was likely that most of the evidence had already been destroyed. Ophelia then asked why Mimiko was keeping the nun alive, and Mimiko responded that she felt the same way Ophelia did. However, since things were more suspicious than she initially thought, she believed Lisa wouldn't be targeted by the church anymore, and she could make use of Marlefis. Additionally, Kurt still wanted to see Marlefis. Ophelia began to think of ways to thank Kurt and regretted not being younger, as she might have offered herself. Mimiko, reading her mind, reminded Ophelia of her age and pointed out the difference between feeling grateful and selling her body. Silently, Ophelia landed a punch on Mimiko like a boxer. Meanwhile, Kilshell found herself inside a mansion that didn't resemble an atelier. Kurt entered and greeted her, asking why she had come. Kilshell looked pleased to see him again. Kilshell surprised Kurt by handing him a box filled with gold coins, saying it was his reward for working hard for their agency. Kurt felt it was too much, but Kilshell couldn't tell him that it was only a small part of the interest on a larger deposit kept aside for him, and that he needed to start using the excess funds. Eurytia then chimed in, reminding Kurt about the taxes merchants paid on her land, and a little extra from the ores he'd previously mined. Kilshell leaned in and quietly asked Eurytia to have Kurt withdraw the rest soon, as the interest kept adding up. Euretia, however, knew that if Kurt was already hesitating with the small amount, he would only refuse the larger sum, thinking it was a mistake. She decided she would find a way to convince him, though it would be tricky unless Kurt realized his own value. To put him at ease, she suggested it must be similar to the payment he received with his previous team, but Kurt admitted he'd never earned rewards. He'd only received enough food for doing chores. This angered Euretia, who began plotting ways to get back at his former teammates. She then told him to accept whatever he was given, as Killshell could get into trouble otherwise. Reluctantly, Kurt agreed. Killshell was touched, thinking Kurt was the only one who always remembered her and her name. She politely declined his invitation to lunch and excused herself, saying she was busy. Euretia offered to walk Killshell part way, claiming they had much to discuss. Before leaving, she encouraged Kurt to use the money freely. Kurt hesitated, unsure of how to spend on himself since the atelier provided everything he needed. Lost in thought, Kurt suddenly remembered he had some shopping to do, but he still found himself sitting alone on a bench in a daze. A voice then called out, saying happiness would escape if he kept wearing such a sad face. A man stood before him. Noticing Kurt's confusion, the man brushed back his hair, revealing himself to be Generic, which startled Kurt. He apologized for not recognizing him at first. Generic asked Kurt to drop the formalities, joking that everyone would be upset if anyone from the atelier showed him such respect. When Kurt mentioned that Generic was a lieutenant general, Generic dismissed the titles, saying they were in debt to the people from the atelier. Kurt thanked him, but added that he hadn't been much help during the event. Generic reminded him of the good food and the fireworks, which made Kurt feel guilty, as he'd scared the citizens and soldiers with the display. Generic assured him it was fine, knowing Kurt's intention was to make it enjoyable for everyone. Kurt thought Generic was truly a remarkable person. Generic asked why Kurt was sighing, and Kurt shared that he didn't know how to spend the rewards he'd earned from jobs back in Samara. Generic, excited, suggested they go to a brothel. He assumed Kurt had been bottling up his feelings while being surrounded by all the beauties in the atelier. Since Kurt was already an adult by their standards, Generic figured he could teach him a thing or two about alcohol and women. Suddenly, an arrow whizzed past in front of Generic's face. He quickly pulled Kurt down with him to take cover, assuming Kurt was being targeted due to recent events at the atelier. Kurt noticed something tied to the arrow, and as he lowered his head at Generic's urging, Generic read the letter attached to it. His expression shifted, and he abruptly told Kurt they wouldn't be going to the brothel after all, making an excuse about receiving orders from his soldiers. He told Kurt to spend his money however he liked. Hearing that, Kurt casually shared a thought with Generic, who laughed loudly, saying he'd tried it once himself, but he added that it would take a fair amount of money, about 2 months' worth of Kurt's current salary. Kurt replied that he might be able to afford it, and Generic suggested they go at night. Kurt, however, was concerned about everyone else's schedules, but Generic urged him to just go for it. The two then continued down the street until they reached a certain bar. Later, when Kurt returned home, he found Lisa practicing with a bow. Lisa mentioned she only knew how to use it for hunting. Kurt asked her what she wanted for dinner, and with a serious expression, Lisa replied that she wanted to fry someone who invites her loved one to brothels. Kurt, confused, didn't understand what she meant. Lisa clarified that she just wanted something fried, so Kurt decided to make some deep-fried food for dinner. After dinner with the atelier members, Kurt noticed Danzo and Cons getting ready to go out and asked if he could join them at the bar, inviting the rest of the team too. Euretia pulled him aside, questioning who had influenced him to drink. Kurt denied it and explained excitedly that the bar owner had recently gotten a new imported fruit juice from the West. However, he felt a bit guilty about hiding one more thing related to the bar. Lisa and Sheena then agreed, suggesting a walk and the fruit juice as dessert. When they arrived, the bar owner was surprised to see everyone from the atelier and guided them to a table. Generic was also there, which made Kurt happy. Then Lisa casually mentioned it was her first time in a bar. Everyone, except Kurt, panicked and immediately prepared her seat. Lisa told them to act normally, and they quickly apologized. Seeing Lisa smile, Kurt was glad she could enjoy time outside the atelier now. He decided to say something, and Euretia noticed, asking if anything was wrong. Kurt felt nervous under their stares, worrying they might think he was being self-centered. Although he feared failing, Generic's encouraging smile gave him the courage. With a bold voice, Kurt announced that the drinks were on him for the day, urging them to enjoy themselves. Euretia was speechless, knowing this would cost Kurt his recent rewards. Generic cheered to kick off the celebration and ordered another round, while Lisa requested a plate of mixed fruits. Some other patrons nearby even asked if they could join in on the treat, and Kurt agreed. Smiling, he felt a small dream come true as he watched everyone enjoying themselves. He quietly thanked Generic, who praised him for doing well. As they sat together, Generic asked Kurt which of the 3 girls he was interested in. Embarrassed, Kurt blushed, so Generic instead brought up someone who might have liked Kurt in the past. Kurt then remembered a merchant's daughter from his village. Though they were awkward at first, they grew closer over time. Once on a trip to the mountains, she accidentally ate a poisonous fruit. With little time left, Kurt in desperation had tried something unusual. He kissed her. Blushing at the memory, Kurt quickly downed a cup of wine. He recalled the desperation of performing CPR in that embarrassing moment and wondered how she was now. Her name was Hildegard. Meanwhile, a horned girl who looked much like Hildegard from Kurt's memory held shackled in a magic circle, waiting as someone approached her again. It was the head of Tycone City. The frontier county of Tycone was the largest and most prestigious aristocratic fiefdom in the country. However, because it bordered demon territory, it required substantial financial support from both the country and foreign allies. On the northern edge of the fiefdom lay the frontier city. People rarely ventured there unless they had important business. A new workshop had been built there, and Kurt, the Atelier Meister, was said to be dangerous if he ever became fully aware of his own powers. Eurytia hoped to settle him in a small, quiet town and allow him to discover his abilities gradually. However, the atelier that Mimico and Ophelia had suggested drew too much attention. Even the princess had come to visit. On top of that, news of the atelier defeating a demon wave had likely spread throughout the country. Eurytia's plan to quietly nurture Kurt had fallen apart within just a month. An old man interrupted her thoughts, mentioning that the reservoir's water was nearly gone, which threatened the crops. Eurytia was pleased with the atelier's popularity, but the requests from surrounding areas kept flooding in. After checking a map, she suggested trading with a nearby village that had a larger reservoir. The old man explained they had already tried but failed, which was why they were now asking the atelier for help with negotiations. Eurytia understood the struggle everyone faced due to the hot weather. Negotiations were usually Lisa's specialty, but she was out of town. As a former adventurer with royal family connections, Eurytia was skilled at negotiating and hoped to strike a good deal for the community. She regrouped with Danzo and asked where the other three had gone. Danzo mentioned they were on a nearby hilltop and told her how they had cared for the old man's bird during the discussion. Eurytia then mounted a horse and headed toward the next village. Upon arriving in the neighboring village, an elderly woman approached her, pleading for help to save their village, which was also suffering from a depleted reservoir. Eurytia felt overwhelmed and wished for rain soon. She then realized she could use the hilltop route to reconnect with Kurt and the others. Suddenly, a group of men ran past her, and seeing the frightened villagers, she grew worried about Kurt and the others' safety. When she finally reached the hilltop, she was astonished to find a pond where waterfowls were happily splashing. She hadn't expected to find any water nearby. Sheena mentioned that there hadn't been a pond just moments ago. Eurytia understood what that meant when she spotted Kurt in the distance. He explained that the waterfowls seemed thirsty, so he had tapped into an underground water vein. Upon closer inspection, it wasn't just a pond, it was a lake. Admiring the clean water, Eurytia imagined building a gazebo beside it and turning the spot into a tourist attraction. The elders from the two villages suddenly appeared and thanked Eurytia. Kurt was impressed by how quickly she had resolved their request. Then an older man appeared and offered Kurt some waterfowl eggs in gratitude. Surprised by the amount, Kurt looked pleased to receive them and began wondering what he might cook with them. Knowing Lisa had gone to report the recent demon attack to the feudal lord, he decided to prepare something special before she returned. Meanwhile, a tired Lisa missed Kurt's cooking. The feudal lord noticed her lack of appetite and asked if the food didn't suit her tastes. Tycone's frontier count, who had authority equal to a duke, clearly had ambitions. If a workshop with a princess's presence was established in his territory, he wouldn't overlook the chance to strengthen his ties to the royal family. Lise sensed the lord's intentions. He hoped to build a connection with royalty through her, expecting that the workshop master might soon be in his debt. She and the lord exchanged fake pleasantries, each knowing the other's hidden motives. The lord then commented that the frontier city where Lisa was staying had no official name yet. Lisa replied that an elected governor would have the right to name it, assuming their conversation was merely polite small talk. Given the city's proximity to demon lands, the lord suggested that it would need strong leadership, and glanced at Aru, implying he might take over. Aru refused, saying he was simply a knight and not interested in such a role. The lord agreed, stating that the military should remain focused on protecting the frontier city, and then proposed that the new workshop master might become its governor. Inwardly, Lisa felt shocked. She realized the lord's scheme to make the workshop master a governor under his control. He pointed out that 3 other workshop masters in the country had already been appointed as governors, which would force Kurt to appear in public as the workshop master. Lisa reluctantly agreed, aware that most knights knew of the workshop master's recent contributions. Still, she felt the need to protect Kurt from any danger, and tried to explain that as a princess she couldn't easily decide matters involving government roles. The lord countered by pointing out the oddity of her visiting as the workshop master's delegate, if she wasn't authorized to make decisions. Lisa grew frustrated at the Lord's persistence. She then argued that the workshop master was new and hadn't achieved much yet, which some noblemen might challenge. But the Lord dismissed her concern, reminding her that the workshop master was already backed by prominent figures like Ophelia and Mimiko, and even the princess, Lisa herself. He added that many knights' lives had been saved by the workshop master, so there would be little opposition. Feeling cornered, Lisa hoped Aru wouldn't say anything unnecessary. Unfortunately, Aru enthusiastically declared that he and the knights would gladly welcome the workshop master as governor. Lisa quickly tried to counter his words, but the Lord interrupted, implying that the workshop master might have personal flaws making him unfit for governance. This comment hit a nerve, and Lisa, feeling her loyalty triggered, retorted that the workshop master was remarkable and unmatched by anyone else. She demanded the Lord retract his words. Then she stopped, realizing she had walked right into his trap. The fat lord clapped his hands, celebrating that they finally had a governor for the frontier city. Even Aru seemed pleased. The lord then announced he would travel to the city in a few days for the official nomination. He quickly ushered Lisa outside, asking her to send his regards to the Atelier Meister. Lisa left his place feeling defeated. When Eurytia heard the news, her head ached with frustration as her plans had completely fallen through. She asked Lisa what had happened, and Lisa could only apologize for the mess. Eurytia wondered if they could get someone from the Sakura party to pose as the Atelier Meister, but Lisa refused. All the knights already knew the three members, and they lacked the technical knowledge to answer any questions. Besides, no one could ever replace Lisa's beloved Kurt in that role. Eurytia understood. Just then, Lisa realized she hadn't seen Kurt around and asked where he was. Eurytia replied that Kurt was busy parenting, which made Lisa panic. She demanded to know who the other woman was and declared that if Kurt had a child, she would adopt it herself as a princess. Eurytia was tempted to comment on her overreaction but was at least relieved Lisa hadn't mentioned harming Kurt or anyone else. Eurytia explained it was a joke, revealing that they had recently received waterfowl eggs from the nearby villages they'd helped, and one was fertilized. It was about to hatch, so Kurt was taking care of it. Lisa, surprised, guessed that something like a hydra or even an extinct diamond turtle might emerge. Knowing Kurt, Eurytia joked, she expected a dragon. The two shared a laugh at their wild imaginations. Just then, Kurt came running in, holding a small creature in his arms, announcing that the egg had finally hatched. Seeing that the little girl looked like Kurt, the girls were shocked and exclaimed that Kurt's baby must have been born. Kurt quickly corrected them, saying they were mistaken. The Sakura party members wondered if the girl might be Kurt's younger sister, but the child kept calling him father. This left everyone in the room bewildered until Eurytia stepped in and asked everyone to calm down. She then reminded them that Kurt had received some waterfowl eggs and had been caring for one that was about to hatch. She asked if the girl had actually hatched from that egg, and Kurt confirmed it. He explained that the little girl, who appeared to be about 3 years old, had indeed hatched from the egg. Eurytia asked if Kurt was sure the egg hadn't been swapped along the way, and Kurt reminded her that they hadn't made any stops on their way home. Eurytia then turned serious. She asked if anyone knew the story of the 6th chick. In the tale, a bird built a nest in a man's tree and laid 5 eggs, but a 6th egg mysteriously appeared and a 6th chick hatched from it. The parent birds worked hard to feed all the chicks, but as they grew, they started disappearing one by one. Eventually, even the parent birds vanished, leaving only the 6th chick behind. Curious, the man placed a ladder against the tree to look inside the nest. There, he saw only the single chick, surrounded by blood-stained feathers. It dawned on him that this one chick had killed the others, along with the parent birds. Horrified, the man burned the nest along with the chick, and the last thing he heard was a strange voice, one that sounded like neither a bird nor a beast. Kurt then asked Eurytia if she was suggesting that the child might be a demon and could be a danger to everyone. Eurytia admitted she wasn't sure, but she knew Kurt had noticed the child wasn't ordinary either. Danzo suggested that the girl had imitated the appearance of the first person she saw as her parent, which could explain her resemblance. Kurt wanted to believe the child wasn't a demon, but Eurytia pointed out that some mid-level demons could disguise themselves as humans. She asked Kurt to hand the child over to her, but he hesitated and asked what she planned to do. Eurytia, without hesitation, declared she would kill the child. Kurt tried to intervene, insisting he'd take full responsibility, but Eurytia refused, telling him to let go. Kurt then argued that the child didn't look like a malicious demon. Deep down, Eurytia only wanted to protect Kurt and the Atelier. Even if it meant being hated, she was willing to act ruthlessly for Kurt's sake. Then the little girl gently placed her hands on Eurytia's cheeks and sweetly called her Mama. Eurytia felt a pang in her heart. For a moment, she envisioned the child as her daughter and Kurt as the father, realizing that they suddenly felt like a little family. Just then, Lisa appeared and reminded her that the child wasn't actually hers or Kurt's. Eurytia asked Lisa to stop reading her mind, but Lisa simply picked up the child and declared she would be the mother. The child then called Lisa Mama too. At this point, Cons realized he needed to speak up. He approached Eurytia and gently patted her back, promising to help raise the child with the team's support. Eurytia and Sheena were both taken aback, and the child called Sheena her big sister, which melted Sheena's heart. She agreed to help raise the child to keep her from turning bad, and even asked Danzo to join in. Eurytia tried to caution everyone not to make rash decisions, but Danzo was already on board. Kurt and the members of the Sakura party pledged to care for the child together. Eurytia, watching Kurt hold the girl while the others argued over her in the background, realized she couldn't bring herself to harm the child anymore. In the end, she decided to take legal custody and become the child's mother. Meanwhile, in the Taikoni fiefdom, the Fat Lord received a message. The report stated that a large number of magic crystals were arriving in the frontier city from the royal capital, sourced from the warehouse of the Third Court magician. A light magic crystal could only affect demons, but a fire magic crystal of similar power could easily destroy an entire town or city. He instructed his maid to investigate Mimiko, intending to discover whether the Atelier Meister in the frontier city was just a puppet. In the royal capital, Ophelia and Michelle made their way to Mimiko. Aware that they were being watched, the two used telepathy to speak without alerting anyone. Michelle suggested they hide their faces, but Ophelia advised her to ignore their observers. When they entered the cafe, Mimiko greeted them, wearing a steaming face mask while working on some documents. She asked them to ignore her appearance, explaining she hadn't rested properly since the recent demon incident. Ophelia snatched the papers from Mimiko and told her to take a break. She also mentioned that they were under close surveillance, and Mimiko shared that they had already arrested 12 spies. Ophelia warned her against leaving the windows open, but Mimiko said she did it to lure in the observers. Mimiko expressed concern for Ophelia's safety, given that most of the phantoms were with Lisa and Kurt. Ophelia reassured her, saying she had Michelle and was well aware that over 100 spies were in the frontier city. Mimiko dismissed them as clueless people who didn't know the true source of the light magic crystals. However, someone had managed to evade the phantoms, closely watching Kurt. Mimiko found this person troublesome, suspecting they might have had a role in Tristan's death. Ophelia then changed the topic, asking if it was true that Kurt had become the governor of the frontier city. Mimiko recalled setting things in motion regarding that. She mentioned she was already drawing all their enemies toward her. Just then, a phantom brought a letter, and Mimiko's face soured as she read it. She claimed her eyes were tired and handed it to Ophelia to read, in case she had misread. Ophelia's expression also turned grim. They confirmed they had read the same thing. A human had hatched from an egg. Mimiko had expected something strange if it involved Kurt. Meanwhile, Lisa and Eurytia were still arguing over who would take on the role of the kid's mother. Shortly after, Eurytia was found peacefully asleep on the balcony, with a little girl nestled beside her. Just a few minutes earlier, Eurytia had stepped outside to calm herself, only for the child to follow and jump into her arms, quickly dozing off. Not wanting to disturb her, Eurytia stayed still. Meanwhile, the Sakura party had resumed their patrol, and Kurt and Lisa were busy preparing a room for the girl. Eurytia was struck by how peacefully the child slept near her, despite their complicated past. When drool began trickling from the child's mouth, Eurytia, concerned, asked if a phantom was nearby. When one appeared, she requested they gently collect samples of the child's drool, hair, and nails for Mimiko to analyze. She was both surprised and moved by her own protective instincts toward the girl, wondering why the child called her mother. She thought it might be because she was the first woman the child had seen, although Lisa's presence made her question that. With these swirling thoughts, Eurytia drifted off to sleep herself, deciding that if the child truly turned out to be a demon, she'd take action. When Kurt finished preparing the room, he came to check on the balcony and saw Eurytia and the child sleeping together, looking serene and endearing. A wave of sadness overcame him as he realized how powerless he'd be if the child were indeed a demon. Feeling that his good intentions had only complicated things for Eurytia, he regretted the weight he'd added to her concerns. Eurytia woke to find Kurt looking emotional and asked if something had happened. Kurt brushed it off, saying he had dirt in his eyes, but Eurytia wasn't convinced, guessing his thoughts were on the child. Apologizing, Kurt admitted he was struggling with the possibility that the child might be a demon. Eurytia reassured him that his feelings were natural, sharing that she too had worried the child might be a demon, and that Kurt's restraint had kept her from reacting too quickly. She reminded him that there was no shame in being uncertain, and her words seemed to relieve him. She then mentioned she'd already sent samples of the child's nails and hair to Mimiko, hoping for clarity soon, though she was prepared to handle any outcome responsibly to keep everyone safe. Eurytia decided to inspect the child's new room and asked if it could be locked from the outside. Kurt confirmed it could, explaining that he'd reinforced the walls, ceiling, and floor with mithril plates. Aside from a small peephole in the door, the room had no windows, making it secure. Although it felt harsh to Kurt, he knew it was necessary to keep everyone safe. He realized he felt responsible for the child, almost as if she were his own. When they arrived, Eurytia thought the door looked charming. Inside the room had a cozy, child-friendly setup which put her at ease. Lisa noticed the soft floor, a detail Kurt had included for safety. The child was still asleep, so they gently tried to wake her and then realized she didn't yet have a name. Kurt and Lisa felt uneasy about this, and Eurytia hesitated, unsure if it was right to name her since they still didn't fully understand her origins, but it seemed practical to give her one. The child soon woke up and, hearing about the idea of a name, lit up with excitement. She looked around, only now realizing the room was hers, and Kurt explained this with a smile. Overjoyed, she started running and rolling around, which Eurytia and Lisa found endearing. Kurt jokingly remarked that she was like their daughter. Lisa suggested the name Kururi by combining her name with Kurt's, but Eurytia disagreed, offering Yukuri instead, noting it included a part of Kurt's name from her own nickname. As the two mamas debated, Kurt proposed Euryce to blend both their names, though they felt it still needed something more Kurt-like. When the child asked if they were fighting, the two quickly reassured her they were just playing around. Embarrassed, they realized how childishly they were acting. In the end, they agreed to each contribute a part to the name, as Kurt watched, amused at how the child had naturally brought them closer together. Kurt finally suggested the name Akuri. Lise recalled that in the Lapras civilization's language, Akuri meant edge. Kurt expanded on this, explaining it could also symbolize the sides of a triangle or square, representing how the child connected them as a family. Both women were touched by the sentiment, and they shared the new name with the child. Akuri happily hugged Kurt and asked her mama and two mamas to play with her. Lisa suggested dressing her up first, so they gave her a fresh outfit. Kurt trimmed her hair, and Eurytia played with her. None of them anticipated how energetic Akuri would be, and they found themselves waiting, and hoping, for her to finally wind down for bedtime. The next morning they had breakfast together in Akuri's room. Eurytia noticed Kurt's new clothes and found the look surprisingly satisfying. She felt bad keeping Akuri in the room while waiting for updates from Mimiko, and regretted that Lisa had to stay back from Akuri, just in case something went wrong. Sheena came over to play with Akuri, and Eurytia gratefully asked her to keep an eye on the girl. Kurt apologized to Akuri, explaining all the tasks he needed to complete, and Eurytia realized she'd been putting too much on his plate, though he always seemed to finish everything in no time. Akuri reassured them sweetly that she'd be a good girl and wait for her papa and mama. With that, Kurt and Eurytia set off. As they rode in the carriage, Eurytia noticed Kurt looking distracted. She reminded him to finish things quickly so they could get back to play with Akuri, which brought a smile to his face. Just then, they heard a noise from inside the carriage. They stopped, opened it up, and found Akuri sitting inside, grinning like a good girl. She immediately jumped into their arms and gave the two a surprise. Eurytia couldn't resist asking how Akuri had managed to sneak into the carriage. Akuri claimed she had simply jumped in, and her parents could only imagine how she did it. Kurt apologized for missing a gap in the room's security, but Eurytia didn't dwell on that. Instead, she wondered how Akuri had slipped past Sheena. Just then, Eurytia noticed some phantom members approaching behind Kurt, disguised as travelers. To distract him, she suggested they take extra precautions, mentioning that members of the Sakura party might be panicking by now. She then pointed out that someone was indeed coming. As she saw the phantoms in their traveler disguises heading towards the frontier city, Eurytia suggested they send word to everyone that Akuri was with them. Kurt admired Eurytia's keen observations but misunderstood her intention entirely. He even mentioned his thoughts to Akuri, referring to Eurytia as Mama. The disguised phantoms hurried off, and Kurt assumed they must be kind people, rushing to deliver the message. Eurytia then asked if Kurt had really just called her Mama, which sounded like something a husband would say, and blushed at the thought. Kurt quickly apologized, realizing it might have been inappropriate. As they continued their journey, Kurt reflected on how rude it was to call someone young and beautiful a mother. He noticed Eurytia was not even looking at him and saw how red her face was, assuming she was upset. In truth, Eurytia just felt embarrassed, as if they were a married couple. Akuri then patted Kurt as if to comfort him, and he decided he would do his best to make up for his mistake. Soon after, an old man greeted them like a game character, welcoming a hero destined to save the world. Kurt eagerly said he'd do his best, but Eurytia quickly clarified that they were only there to check on the pigs. Just then, a beautiful woman appeared and apologized for her father, explaining he was fascinated by prophets and loved to talk like one. She introduced herself as the requester and the old man's daughter-in-law, thanking them for coming. However, she didn't expect to see what looked like a pair of newlyweds with a cute child. Akuri, joining in the fun, called Kurt and Eurytia her parents. Kurt grew nervous, fearing that Eurytia would be even more upset. He glanced over and saw that she was standing there, frozen and blushing. But he still misunderstood her reaction as anger and tried to correct the woman. Before he could say much, the woman had already begun explaining the village's request. She mentioned that the pigs on their ranch hadn't been eating much lately. Kurt took a quick look at the pigs and suggested that the summer heat was affecting their appetite. He offered to prepare some special feed for them. Impressed by his capability, the woman remarked on the skill of people from his workshop and decided to leave the task in his hands. She said she'd take her father on a walk and told Kurt he could use anything in their storage. When Kurt looked back, Eurytia was still standing frozen in the same spot, and he assumed it was because she was in shock over the misunderstanding. Determined to finish the work quickly, he decided to let Eurytia leave afterward. In reality, Eurytia was simply lost in a daydream about being Kurt's wife and having a child together. She finally snapped out of it, wondering what on earth she was thinking. Ever since Akuri's arrival, her imagination had been running wild, fueled even more by Lisa's influence. She reminded herself that she didn't have any improper thoughts about Kurt, who was younger than her. He was someone she needed to protect as part of her job. But when Kurt looked her way and smiled, Eurytia felt a strange ache in her chest, knowing it was all just work. So why did it make her heart hurt so much? A loud roar echoed through the village, and a dragon swiftly flew above their heads. Eurytia broke into a cold sweat at the sight of such a terrifying creature. Kurt and Akuri, however, hadn't noticed the dragon yet. They were too busy preparing pig feed. Eurytia called out to them, urging them to run, but the dragon was already approaching. Kurt then asked Eurytia to put away her sword. The dragon landed directly in front of Akuri, making Eurytia panic and shout for the child to run, fearing she'd be attacked. To Eurytia's surprise, the dragon fixated on the pig feed Kurt and Akuri had prepared. Kurt casually mentioned that he hadn't told Eurytia before, but in his countryside village, a dragon would often come by whenever livestock were being fed. Eurytia exclaimed that this wasn't normal, feeling baffled. Kurt seemed confused by her reaction, and Eurytia wondered who was truly odd between them. Just then, Akuri pointed at the dragon, calling it a big doggy. Kurt corrected her, explaining that it was a dragon, but Eurytia exclaimed that this wasn't the time for explanations. She gripped her hair in frustration, leaving Kurt to wonder if she was upset again. Kurt calmly assured Eurytia that the dragon only came for food and wouldn't attack unless provoked. He asked her to put away her sword. Eurytia glanced at the dragon, now calmly interacting with the delighted Akuri, and reluctantly sheathed her sword, trusting Kurt's words. She asked if this sort of thing was typical in Kurt's hometown. Kurt replied that they would sometimes use food to attract a dragon to help drive away goblins. Eurytia couldn't help but wonder what kind of place he'd grown up in. Just then, Akuri announced that the dragon had pooed. Kurt quickly told her not to say that, while Eurytia began to freak out, knowing that dragon excrement was highly valuable. Kurt, however, looked confused and explained that back home they only used it as fertilizer for their bean fields. Eurytia pointed out that selling it to a magic store could buy them several tons of beans, but Kurt simply found it strange that anyone would buy such a thing. Assuming Eurytia was joking, he laughed it off, leaving Eurytia feeling nostalgic over the familiar misunderstanding. Kurt remembered he had some leftover beans with him, so he decided to scatter them across the field along with the dragon's manure. He quickly got to work, thinking it would help solve the requester's issue with finding food for the pigs. Within minutes of tilling the beans and dragon manure into the soil, the field transformed into a dense bean forest. Eurytia couldn't believe how fast the beans grew, and Kurt explained that without the dragon's manure, it would normally take 3 days. Eurytia began to wonder if she was the odd one for being surprised. Just then, the dragon approached Eurytia, making her nervous. The dragon seemed to be alerting Kurt that something was wrong with the field. Eurytia decided to investigate and immediately smelled blood upon entering. She hurried to the center of the field and found a phantom lying on the ground, wounded and bleeding. She remembered that this phantom was Kurt's guard. As she turned to run back to Kurt, someone suddenly attacked her from the shadows, but she managed to dodge on instinct. She struck back with her sword and caught sight of a figure watching her from behind the bushes. Kurt heard the clash of swords and called out to Eurytia, asking what was happening. Then Eurytia was thrown out of the field and she shouted for Kurt to head to the house and lock the door. A woman with large claw-like blades and an intimidating presence appeared. To be honest, something else was more intimidating here. She started demanding they hand over the kid. Eurytia was taken aback by this. She wondered if the child the woman was after was either Akuri or the young dragon. Then Kurt seemed to realize something, and Eurytia wondered if he recognized the woman. Kurt suddenly exclaimed that the woman was a dragon hunter. Eurytia had only heard of dragon hunters as legendary adventurers who hunted and traded dragons, but this woman's presence hinted at something even more sinister. The woman shifted her stance, and Eurytia told Kurt to escape with Akuri. The young dragon then scooped Kurt, who was holding Akuri, and began to fly away. The woman was startled to see her target escaping. Eurytia remembered that taming a dragon was nearly impossible, but she expected nothing less from Kurt. Just then, throwing knives flew at the woman, forcing her to retreat. Eurytia lured her away from the village, not wanting any trouble when her clients returned. But she knew her opponent was incredibly strong. Stronger even than the recent demon she had defeated. and realized that her chances of survival in this fight were slim. The woman noticed Eurytia's hesitation and tripped her, then struck with a killing blow, but Eurytia rolled away just in time. The woman quickly followed up with a slash to Eurytia's stomach. Blood poured out heavily as Eurytia fell to the ground, gritting her teeth in pain. She spotted a stake nearby and used it to block another attack. The woman dodged, and Eurytia used the moment to retrieve her sword and get back on her feet. She demanded to know if the woman was targeting the young dragon, but the woman only sneered, saying she didn't need to talk to someone as good as dead. Eurytia kept fighting, barely catching her breath. Her sword locked against the woman's claw blades, rendering it useless as the woman lunged for her head. Eurytia dodged, reclaimed her sword, and went for the woman's neck, but her opponent was faster, kicking Eurytia's wounded stomach. Seeing her sword out of reach, Eurytia pulled out throwing knives. She had a plan, breaking a magic crystal she carried that would unleash a powerful earth-type spell. The crystal shattered, setting off a massive rumble that buried the woman under a landslide of earth and stone. The noise was so intense that even Eurytia's clients heard it from afar. Finally able to catch her breath, Eurytia watched the rubble, commenting on how tough the battle had been, and wondering what exactly the woman had been after. Suddenly, the woman's blade-covered arm emerged from the debris. She appeared transformed, with midnight black eyes, horns, and monstrous legs. Eurytia realized that the woman wasn't just a beast woman, but someone from the demon race, known for their immense magic and physical strength, and humanity's natural enemies. It struck Eurytia that there hadn't been sightings of demons outside their lands for hundreds of years. The woman looked at her wounds, impressed, and remarked that it was expected from someone who had defeated a high-class demon. Eurytia realized then that they had been watching them all along and that Kurt had been the true target. Noticing how unscathed the demon looked, Eurytia understood she couldn't win with just a knife and accepted that these could be her last moments. She hoped Kurt had made it back to the frontier city on the dragon's back, and that the Sakura party members and phantoms would be enough to protect him. In her final thoughts, she couldn't help but feel a deep regret. The two fighters suddenly noticed someone approaching. It was Kurt, still riding the dragon. He called out to Eurytia with worry, almost like a concerned husband. Eurytia burst into tears and asked why he'd come back, thinking it was foolish for him to return. Strangely, even the demon seemed surprised by his appearance. Eurytia wondered if Kurt intended to fight the demon using the dragon, but she doubted his combat skills. Rightfully so, as he clumsily fell off the dragon like a hapless clown. Calling him an idiot, she demanded to know why he'd returned. Kurt declared he was there to help them escape. Just then, Eurytia heard a rumbling sound, not from the Titans, but from a stampede of pigs from a nearby ranch. Kurt then grabbed Eurytia, and they both dove into the midst of the pig horde. Realizing his plan to use the chaos to escape from the demon woman, Eurytia was relieved. Kurt assured her that Akuri was safe. She then asked if it was normal in his hometown to attack enemies from the air on a dragon. Laughing, Kurt admitted it wasn't and said it was the first time he'd done something so reckless. He added that it was natural for a man to risk his life to save an important lady. Eurytia was left speechless. She knew he meant it as a friendly gesture, but her heart fluttered regardless. She couldn't deny that she'd fallen hopelessly in love with him. Suddenly, she felt a strange sensation and quickly grabbed Kurt. An explosion erupted in front of the charging pigs, scattering them everywhere. As they looked up, they saw the demon woman ready to strike them down with a powerful magic spell. That is the end of the recap at Chapter 31. Please read the pinned comment about the next part.